Good morning, everyone. As is my habit, I will wait a few more moments for everyone to fully connect and join the Zoom room.
Good morning. This is the court reporter. I just had a quick question. I'm not sure it's for you or the attorneys. I did notice that there was one hearing transcript before I started, and I was wondering, since I'm going to be turning in the finals soon, if you wanted that to be volume one and I started on volume two, or just start with volume one when I started.
I guess I'll look to Mr. Hitchings. Do you have a thought about the best way to organize this? I mean, I think what we have here, right, is the first day of hearing, which was policy statements, and then we've started here with the evidentiary portion. So there's an argument, I think, to go either way, but I don't know if either you or Mr. Ferguson have an opinion.
I haven't really thought about that.
You want to let me know?
Yeah, why don't we
Okay.
we'll confer here and let you know.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right. I'm
Thank you for
set
the
whenever
question.
you are.
With that, I'll go ahead and get started. Good morning. Welcome back. It is Tuesday, September 3rd. I am Nicole Kinsey, the presiding hearing officer for the Administrative Hearings Office of the State Water Resources Control Board. This is the hearing on the pending petition for assignment of state filed application 25517 and accompanying water right application 25517X01, and the pending request for release from priority of state filed applications 25513, 25514, the unassigned portion of 25517, 22235, 23780, and 23781 in favor of water right application 25517X01 of Sites Project Authority. Welcome back. This is our second week of hearing. I hope you all had a restful, long weekend. I'm joined here today by Board Member Diadamo, who you will see joining us, and we may be joined by other board members during our day and future hearing days as well. This hearing is being conducted by Zoom only. None of us are in person. If at any point you are having technical difficulties trying to join the Zoom teleconference or communicate with us, as I've mentioned before, please send an email to the site's email inbox at sites-wr-application@waterboards.ca.gov or to the AHO email inbox. AHO staff are monitoring that and can let me know. This hearing is being broadcast live on the AHO YouTube channel. If you are not planning to speak today, please use the YouTube channel for viewing the hearing rather than logging into the Zoom platform. Both the audio and video of this hearing are being recorded, and we will post files of this recording in the FTP folder for this proceeding, and the YouTube recording will be available on the AHO YouTube webpage. As we have done, we will take breaks today as needed, mid-morning, a lunch, and so forth. We will again have a hard stop at 5 p.m. And we again have Ms. Mullen assisting us with exhibits today. So if you are a witness or an attorney and would like Ms. Mullen to bring up a particular exhibit, please go ahead and feel free to address her directly. I'm not planning to call for appearances today. I'll carry those over from our last week of hearing. That said, please do identify yourself for the court reporter when you speak. It's hard with a large Zoom room sometimes to tell who's speaking. In terms of the agenda for the day, I think where we left off, as I recall, was with cross-examination by Mr. Herrick of the authorities panel 3. Before we begin that, I did want to address some procedural issues and then look to the room to see if there are other procedural issues we should talk about. I am planning on issuing a procedural ruling on some of the outstanding motions. Hopefully it'll come out later today. My team is small. It's hard for us to do two things at once, but we might manage it. So hopefully it'll come out later today or first thing tomorrow morning. I did want to highlight some things because we're on time constraints in terms of the site visit. So for the site visit, what I would like, I think as you saw, my office issued a notice of site visit last week and identified the start times for 10 a.m. on September 9th at the Tehama-Colusa Canal Authority office, and then 9 a.m. on September 10th at the Sites Project Authority's office in Maxwell. And I would like revised proposed itineraries, particularly, well, from all of you who proposed stops, but a revised itinerary that would be consistent with those start times and that would put us at an end time of approximately 5 o'clock each day. And I'd like to see those by the end of the day, by 5 p.m. tomorrow. I realize that's a fast turnaround. Please do your best. We're trying to pin this down. That way I can get something out to you on Thursday so that you know what we're doing. And then if there are any issues we need to talk about on Friday when we reconvene, we can do that. I also want, with what I'm asking for with that proposed itinerary, is a certified, not certified, a verification, a signed verification that, at least with respect to the points of interest that the party you represent is proposing to visit, that you have appropriate access, including access to get to and to leave, if that's the right, to travel to and to travel away from the point of interest. I know we've talked about some private property concerns, and I do want to make absolutely certain that we are not inviting folks onto private property without appropriate permissions. So I do want that certification by the end of the day with the proposed itinerary tomorrow. That way, if you don't have them, we can't visit those locations and we can revise accordingly. I appreciate all of that, and I appreciate it's a short turnaround on that. On that point, are there any questions or concerns? Mr. King.
So, good morning, Presiding Officer Kunze. I submitted a motion for additional 95 minutes. I submitted that motion on Friday. I wondered if you had time to consider that, because I have 50,
I was getting to
58
that.
minutes. Okay.
I was getting to that next. I just wanted to get through the site visit and then we'll turn to that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments on the site visit at this time? All right, Mr. King, thank you. As you, I don't want to say you stole my thunder, but I did receive your motion for additional time, and I did have a chance to consider it, and this is what I'd like to do at this point. I do want to make sure that you have an opportunity to make an opening statement and present a summary of your direct testimony. So I am going to grant you an additional 20 minutes that's reserved just for that purpose and set it aside here. And the reason I chose 20 minutes is that 10 minutes is the time allowed for any party to make an opening statement. And then based on your written testimony, an additional 10 minutes seemed like actually a generous amount of time to summarize that testimony. But I do want to make sure you have a chance to speak and provide direct testimony with respect to your case in chief. So I will grant that additional 20 minutes. With respect to the remaining time on cross-exam, what I included in the procedural ruling that you'll see is that once you finish out your cross-examination time, if you have additional questions for the panels of witnesses, I'd like for you to submit them to me in writing in advance. I will not share them with the witnesses. It's cross-exam, so they will not be aware of those questions, but I will have a chance to review them and make a determination as to whether the questions are relevant to the hearing issues and are likely to elicit probative evidence and be a productive use of our time. And then based on that, you may have additional time we can figure out whether I ask the questions or you ask the questions. We'll get to that. And then for the other parties, what we would do is once Mr. King has the chance to ask those questions on cross-exam, I would of course include in the administrative record a copy of the full list of questions that Mr. King sent me. So that will be disclosed. It will be withheld for a short period of time, just in the interest of the cross-examination, that those questions aren't necessarily made available to the witness in advance. Mr. King, do you have any further comment or questions about that process?
So I believe I have 58 minutes left of the 240 that she allotted me. So you're giving me 20 more minutes for the purposes of my opening statement and a summary of my written testimony. Is that correct?
Yeah,
In
that's
total,
correct.
in total, is that right? So
Yes.
I would note that my written testimony is like 6 pages, single space, but you think that's enough time, and of course it's your discretion.
I believe so. If your summary is productive and we run out of time, we can deal with that. But
Okay.
based on my reading, it was I I think you can summarize it. The quotes, there were quite a number of quotes. You don't need to read those into the record. The written testimony goes into the record. So that's the the purpose of having it in writing. Your opportunity here orally is to summarize it and point out the high points.
Okay. And then you also gave me an option to share time with Clark Armbaum. Is that
Yes.
still available?
That is still on the table.
Okay. So, okay. And then going forward, I didn't have a chance to prepare the written questions today
Understood.
for this panel, but going forward, do you want me to submit questions in writing and then so I had the option of submitting questions in writing to you or using if Mr. Ornbaum really allowed me to use his time.
That's correct.
right?
And yes. And then if you would submit, I include this in the written ruling, but if you would submit the questions to me before cross-examination begins of that particular panel, that would allow me time to review them.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time and consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. King. Are there any other, I'll look to the room, any other procedural issues we should address before we turn back to our panel 3 and cross-examination?
Yeah, good morning, hearing officer. Can I respond quickly on
Yes.
the prior point? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, my understanding from one of your prior rulings was that those requests for additional time weren't really supposed to be made until all time had been exhausted. So it does appear that the request was premature. In any event, I think we're okay with what you suggested as far as the 20 minutes for the time for the opening statement and summarizing the testimony. I also understood from what you had indicated earlier was that to the extent that additional cross-examination questions would be submitted to you, that was if all of the time was expended of the time that's been allotted. And so I didn't understand it that for every single witness that comes up, there's an opportunity to submit proposed cross-examination questions to you if Mr. King still has time available on his allocation. So just maybe a point of clarification on that.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchings. Let me try to clarify if I understand the question. What I intended is that if Mr. King uses up the remainder of his time and any time that he may negotiate with Mr. Ornbaum, at that point, if Mr. King had additional questions for the witnesses, then those would need to be submitted to me in advance so that I can make a decision as to whether it's an efficient use of our time, our hearing time that is valuable to all of us, I'm sure. Does that clarify and respond to your question?
Yes, thank you very much. And then I guess the last point I'd like to make is with these additional enlargements of time, we realize that we are at this point limited to the 40 hours, but every time additional time is allocated the other side, it opens up the possibility where we would need more time because of potential redirect or whatever the circumstance might be. And I know we would make a showing of good cause on that, but I just wanted to flag that it does become more challenging for us to stay within our time limits if the protestants get additional increments of time throughout the process.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchings. Noted. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to, I think, if I can turn back to Mr. King, Mr. Rees, I see you. But I'll turn back to Mr. King. Do you have another comment on this point?
Oh, yes. And then one comment on the proposed itinerary. On this point, yeah, I don't believe that I will, in I guess, materially harm the case of Mr. Hitchings' client. And I would note that T&M King Farms is the only appropriate right holder that has not been subordinated in the Coosa Subbasin, and that the authority actually tried to suppress protests by offering subordination if you did not protest, and that is in the letter of Mr. Brown.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Do you have a procedural point, please?
So, okay, no, so then that's all I want to say, since Mr. Hutchins talked about his harming his case. But regarding the itinerary, the Davis Weir Dam site, I do not claim to have, from what I understand, my rights as under the easement of the Department of Resources to the Davis Weir site. But it is owned by Ketchel Dahy, and they have proposed to actually attend that, and they have put together quite an impressive group of tribal interests of 6 people to attend that site. I do not have direct contact with them. I have not spoken to them directly about this, but they have made interest in attending that. And so, from a point of tribal engagement, I would imagine that somebody should reach out or ask them if they would still like to have us meet at that site, because they definitely have access to that, as I understand the easement that the state has, the Department of Resources has for that site, since it's that site is on their land. So I don't know how you want to handle that, but from a tribal engagement point, and also for the time and efficiency from Ketchel Dahy and its party, it's like six people with quite an impressive party. So I want to raise that point.
Thank you, Mr. King. I don't want to keep skipping over you, and I realize, sorry, Mr. Herrick, now I can see you. It is a distance, yeah. Or Mr. Rees or Mr. Herrick, did you have a comment on this point, or should I return back to you?
No, my comment is just on what the itinerary is for today.
Okay, we'll get
skipping. Yeah, I figured you'd get to that, but I just wanted
we'll get back to you
before you started. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Hitchings, I believe it's back to you.
Yes, thank you, hearing officer. As far as that location that Mr. King referenced, that is not a location that the Sites Authority has proposed. And to the extent that Mr. King or Ketchel Dahy intends to and wants to include that on the itinerary, it should not be other parties' responsibility to confirm access not only to the point, but also full ingress and egress from that point. So I think if ultimately Mr. King or a protestant wants to include a stop on the tour, the onus is on them to confirm the access and permission issues that you indicated in the beginning. And so as far as outreach or any obligation placed on the Sites Authority for that's not a stop that we had proposed, and don't feel that should be a responsibility that we should be burdened with.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchings. Mr. King. Yeah, okay.
I apologize. I hadn't left my hand up.
There's a residual hand that happens. Thank you, Mr. Hitchings. Thank you, Mr. King. I think, and this is where we're coming down to the wire here. This is where it's a little difficult without, and it's unfortunate that we don't have the tribes here today so that we can, and during this hearing, so that we can communicate directly. If we don't have verification of access, then we will need to at least defer, I think, the visit to that point, and we can talk about whether it's something we can get on the calendar for October 22nd. I've looked too, I don't know if the NGO parties, whether you have an interest in that particular site as well, but I think this is something we may need to take up at a later time, given that we're down to the wire on putting together an itinerary, and there are some points that we necessarily are going to have to bump. I realize this might mean our itinerary is not as efficient geographically as would otherwise might make sense, but I do think it's important to see these points of interest. That said, the AHO isn't in a position to negotiate access, so I am relying on all of you to work out those, and I appreciate your efforts to that end. But let's revisit this issue, and if there is anyone who is in communication with the tribes, that certainly further discussion is welcomed from my perspective, and we certainly would appreciate the opportunity to visit the site. With that, Mr. Herrick and Mr. Rees, do you have questions about our agenda for the day? You're on mute.
I just wanted to confirm that you're skipping. What my understanding was that we were going from when we do finish panel 3, we were going into panel 5.
That is correct.
Okay, and if we do finish panel 5, we're stopping. We weren't going to go into panel 4.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Good. I'm glad we're all on the same page. Are there any other issues to address before we reconvene panel 3 and turn things over to Mr. Herrick?
It's always a bad idea to turn things over to Mr. Herrick.
Well, I will look to my team. Will you please assemble the witnesses and the relevant parties, and then we'll get started. I believe, and I can read off possibly the witness list.
And I'm sorry, this is the Corey Porter. Remind me who was sitting with Mr. Herrick.
Board member Diadamo.
No.
I'm sorry, in the room, Mr. Herrick and Dean Reese, Ruiz. If I got that right.
Yes.
And there we have it. I will say welcome back to the witnesses. Thank you for joining us once again. I will handle it this way. Do the five of you recall that when we last met together on Thursday that I administered the oath with respect to your testimony? And let the record show that I received a head nod from all of the witnesses. And with that, I will turn things back over to you, Mr. Herrick.
Thank you, Hearing Officer Kinsey, staff, everybody, and attorneys involved, and thanks for the panel again for showing up. I'll try to be quick here. The intro I want to give is that last week I got off on a number of tangents, and so I'll try to make sure I stay on separate lines of inquiry and then move on each time. So with that, most of my questions again are for Dr. Sadat. So Dr. Sadat, welcome back. In our questioning last week, you confirmed that the inputs for DSM-2 were from the CalSim-2 model, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, instead of using the CalSim-2 inputs, could you have used the actual data of things like inflow and water quality and stuff like that?
Could you please more specific what do you mean by the actual data?
I believe we have actual data for flows on the Sacramento River as they enter Sacramento. We have water quality at locations entering the Delta like that. So that's what I mean by the actual data, is the measured data that the system includes.
Well, the modeling I did is a planning simulation. So DSM-2 can be used at 3 different modes. It has different usages. One is historical, one is forecasting, and one is planning simulation. And what I did was a planning simulation over a long term, which is 82-year period. And that's why we use CalSim as an input to DSM-2, that we have 82 years of period.
Okay.
So this is not the historical. In the historical, observed data might be used, but DSM-2 is calibrated and validated using the observed data.
Okay, my question was, could you have used as I described it, the actual data for things like inflow and EC of inflow?
For this purpose, of assisting like the effects of size project on a planning simulation, no, we could not use the observed data.
Well, that's for a planning simulation. I'm talking about trying to discover the impacts of the project on legal users of water. So the question is, could you have used the actual data rather than the CalSim-2 inputs?
Well, first, I don't know how much observed data are available to be used to assess the impacts. And the point is, sites has not built yet. There is no sites reservoir yet. It's all looking at the future, and this is, I don't know how observed data right now could help assessing the impacts of the facility that hasn't been in place yet. So it just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, the facility wasn't in place over the 82-year period you modeled, was it?
That's how it's modeled in CalSim.
The facility wasn't in place during the 82 years you modeled, correct?
But in the model is developed based on having sites reservoir in it. So it considers having the sites reservoir in delta, like in the operation modeling. So the calcium modeling assumes there's a site reservoirs, there's diversions, there are releases, and then we use those outputs of calcium that considers all those diversions and releases in the SM2 model. Those observed data that we have, the gauge data, there aren't any releases or diversions happening right now with sites because there's no sites project right now operating. And it's not going to give us any understanding of the impacts of sites project.
This may take a while. Dr. Sadat, you could use the, as I called it, actual data for the base case, correct? That doesn't affect whether or not sites is operating or not. You could produce a base case using the actual data, correct?
We don't have 82 years of data to use for the base.
I didn't ask you to model 82 years. I asked you if you could use the actual data to produce the base case. And so, of course, you'd have to make a decision about how much actual historic data you use, but it doesn't have to be 82 years, does it?
Well, I'm not sure if I can give you the answer. Maybe someone from the calcium modeling can give you the answer if the assumptions that are implemented in calcium, I am not 100% aware of all those assumptions are based on the existing conditions in the delta. So if hypothetically, if that was the case, we are comparing, so we are looking at, this is a long-term analysis. We want to see the trend in a long term. So a short period of time of data, I don't think it will give us much information or any helpful information in that regard.
So it's your testimony that if you say use the last 20 years of actual data as the inputs to calcium 2, that wouldn't be an effective analysis? Or useful, I believe is what you said. Sorry.
I mean, it depends on the purpose of the study. This is a comparative analysis, and baseline and alternative tree, they all have similar assumptions. The similar assumptions are implemented in calcium, and then sites like alternative tree is sites project. So we want to compare two scenarios with same assumptions, just on addition, sites is an additional assumptions to alternative tree. So we're going to see that to eliminate all the other factors that could impact. We're looking at the sites reservoir, like
I don't mean to cut you off, but that this description of what and how and all this about how the model works, those aren't the questions I'm asking you. Your counsel can ask you on redirect to explain things, and that's fine. But we have limited amount of time, so I'm trying to get concise answers. You can certainly explain your answer, but I'm trying to stick to it. So let me start over and say, in your testimony on page 9 of Sites 110, you make the statement that although the modeling cannot completely mimic operational decisions, it does show that there will not be negative water quality impacts nor negative effects to legal users of water due to water level changes. So you're actually making a conclusion there about effects on legal users of water, right?
My conclusions is based on the modeling I've done.
Okay, your statement there is concluding that there aren't negative impacts to legal users, correct? The statement I just read.
That's my understanding based on the model results I evaluated. I looked at the model results and I do not see an increase in salinity or an increase in water level, which is higher than like 1/10 of a foot. And based on those results that I see, based on this planning simulation that I've done, I make that conclusion. And I also have mentioned that sites has to comply with water level response plan. So if and so we talked about the day-to-day operations last time, which I'm not an expert on, but I know that sites authority will comply to water level response plan. But based on the modeling results I see, I make that conclusion because I check the results and I don't see an impact.
Well, you just said you don't see any impacts. That's not correct. You've listed the impacts in your data and your summaries, right? There are
Which is
impacts.
higher than the percentages that I provided. Like for EC, I went through.
I don't mean to be rude, and the hearing officer can certainly yell at me, but I keep asking you specific questions and you keep launching into an explanation that's not the answer. So you said that you didn't see any impacts, and I just asked you, doesn't your testimony and supporting data show impacts, correct? It does show impacts.
It shows impact, but those impacts are very small.
Okay. Now, how did you move from a small impact to the conclusion that it doesn't adversely affect a legal user of water?
Well, I guess if you let me explain, when I look at the EC results, for example, the results that I evaluated, the increases are less than 3%. And when I check the water level results are within if there are any increases, there are within a tenth of a foot. And keeping in mind that site's authority will comply with the water level response plan and do day-by-day operation and real-time operation to mitigate any potential impacts that sites might have. Based on this, I make the conclusion that there won't be any effects to legal users of water level.
Okay, how did you determine whether or not a 3% change in water quality, which is EC, how did you determine whether or not that will actually affect legal users of water in the Delta?
Well, the 3% change is not a uniform change that happens in an 82-year period. It's just the maximum.
I don't want to interrupt you again, but the question is, how did you determine that an average impact of 3% change in water quality does or does not affect a legal user? How did you do that?
Well, that's not the only results I look at. I also look at the water quality compliance locations. And when I check the water quality objectives, the D1641 water quality objectives, I see that alternative 3 does not decrease the ability to meet D1641 compliance objectives. So when I don't see any impacts, that's based on my conclusion. So I also look at the water compliance objectives. When I don't see the frequency of meeting D1641 is changing, that's why I make this conclusion that I don't see that impact.
Well, you keep saying you don't see impacts. We do see impacts, and those are average impacts, correct? Your results are in averages, correct?
Which results are you talking about?
The EC results.
I presented, well, the EC results that are presented in the appendices are presented in different forms. So when you're referring to EC results, I don't know exactly which one you're referring to. So it would be great if you could specify what exact results you're talking about.
The results that you presented to us in discussing the impacts on water quality in the South Delta. Now, again, maybe we have to start from the beginning again. Your EC results, all of your EC results are constituted of averages, correct?
Not all of the EC results. The water quality compliance exceedance plots that are in Appendix 6B5, those are based on the daily results. So we're looking at the daily EC results, and then we compare it with the objective, and then we determine whether we're exceeding those objectives or not. So those are based on daily results.
Okay. How did you determine? Well, first of all, isn't it correct to say that in your testimony and in Cites 256, you didn't provide probability exceedance for any of the South Delta standards locations? And by the standards, I mean the water quality standards.
Can you please tell me where in my testimony you're referring to?
Well, I can't tell you where you didn't do something, but I can show you on slides 13 through, I think it's 13 through 17. You have probability curves, correct? That's slides 13 through 17 on Cites 256.
Correct, yes. So those,
Okay, wait. Let me ask a question. So those going from 13 to 17 are Sacramento River at Edmonton, Sacramento at Jersey Point, Sacramento at San Andreas, South Fork McCollum River at Terminus, and Contra Costa Canal at Pumping Plant 1, correct?
right, yes.
And there aren't any of those probability curves in sites 256 for any of the South Delta water quality compliance locations. Is that correct?
Yes, we do not show those results here, but the export loading reporting metrics, which is Appendix 6B4, that shows the EC results, the chloride results for the pumping, for the Jones Banks and Contra Costa Water District. And those results showed that there aren't any changes between the alternative 3 and no action alternative. There
Okay,
are
those-
very minor.
Those last two locations you mentioned, are those EC compliance locations in the South Delta?
Are you talking, which location are you talking about?
The locations you just mentioned, the pumping plants, and I believe you said a Contra Costa intake.
Yes, those are the export facilities.
Yes, and so you don't show any data for Tracy Old River compliance location for salinity, or Middle River at Middle River at Old River, or Brant Bridge on San Joaquin, correct?
Mr. Herrick, may I just add to help you in case you hadn't seen it before, is that if you look at AHO 136, those data are available.
What on page what of what?
Exhibit AHO 136.
Okay.
I don't
Yeah,
have a specific page number for you. I apologize, but
Yeah, that's not presented in Dr. Sadat's testimony, correct?
there is a table at the beginning of it that identifies the pages where different locations are prepared. You are right that those, I don't believe that is referenced in Dr. Sadat's written testimony.
Okay, well, I'm trying to explore her testimony. I appreciate your input at where I might find the data. So, Dr. Sadat, are you aware of any violations of the water quality standards at the 3 South Delta salinity EC compliance locations over the past 20 years?
I'm not aware of any.
Are you aware of the times when the maximum amount of EC change, and by that I mean negative or increasingly, the maximum amount of EC change in your calculations would bring the existing or the modeled EC up to the standard number?
Can you please repeat that? I did not get the question.
Did you examine when the maximum increase in EC under your calculations would reach or exceed the water quality standard for that time of year?
Are you talking about the compliance location that we looked at the exceedance of the compliance location?
The question dealt with all of the compliance locations. Did you take your greatest increase in EC and see if at any time during the year that increase in and of itself would reach or exceed the water quality standard at that location?
Well, I guess it was in the slides that there are a couple of locations that water quality exceeds the water quality objectives. And just again, that's the same case for both baseline and for both alternative 3. So the frequency of meeting those water quality objectives is not going to change under alternative 3. And these are because of this, like the time steps are different in calcium and DSM-2, and most of these changes, most of these exceedances that we see are because of those assumptions that are implemented in calcium. So maybe calcium experts can explain that more, but that's my understanding. And I see in the results that there is no changes in meeting the 1641 water quality objectives under alternative 3 as compared to no action alternative.
But is that, You said you're not aware of the violations of the Southern Delta EC standards over the past 20 years.
I have some general understanding of the Delta situation, the south of Delta and overall, but I'm not aware of all the specifics and details of problems in the Delta.
If the water quality standard at, say, Tracy Old River was exceeded during a time when the sites project resulted in a modeled increase of 3% of EC, do you consider that not an adverse effect on legal users?
Can you please repeat the question?
Perhaps it could be read back. Court reporter, read it back.
One moment. If the water quality standard at, say, Tracy Old River was exceeded during the time when the sites project resulted in a modeled increase of 3% of EC, do you consider that not an adverse effect on legal users?
Well, hypothetically, if it would, because the result didn't show that it would, but if it hypothetically it would, that again depends on because when I read the water level response plans, or I don't see that it's mentioned that how much it should be exceeded to just say that that's a harmful increase.
Okay, well, you mentioned the water level response plan. The question dealt with water quality. So can you answer again without referencing a water level response plan?
Since this covers part of appropriate use modeling results, may I jump in, Mr. Herrick?
Sure.
Just from a general perspective, the evaluation of the calcium 2 model or the results from the modeling framework, the idea is not to look at a specific time period within the modeled simulation period, because as Mr. Whittington had expressed late last week, there's a lot of context to what's going on in the modeled situation. So the way that the results are analyzed and presented is through a frequency of exceedance and exceedance curves that captures trends within the results to evaluate whether or not there's a change between a with and without project.
Thank you, Mr. Miko. Now you just said the modeling is looking at trends. I don't want to overstate that. Is that generally correct what you just said? Trends?
Generally, that is correct.
Okay. Well, in the analysis of the effect on legal users of water, how do you reconcile trends with potential actual injury?
I can answer that from a model perspective of if there's a significant increase, a trended increase in water quality at a specific location, that would cause a problem to arise. And then if there was an evaluation of water quality compliance at a given location, in exceedance of that water quality compliance increased, under a with project compared to without project, that may indicate that there could be issues with that project and legal users of water.
Would you agree then that once you do the modeling effects, in order to determine actual effects on legal users, you then have to take those model effects and somehow apply them to the real world? Wouldn't you agree with that?
Okay. I'm sorry. I know there's been a lot of back and forth, Mr. Herrick.
Okay, let me start over. Let me start over.
Okay,
That's right.
thank you. Yeah.
Are you an agronomist?
No.
Are you a soil scientist?
No.
Do you have an understanding as to what level of salinity in the applied water causes an adverse effect on a farmer's crop?
Based on the compliance requirements in D1641, that'd be my limitation, I guess. So roughly, I have a general understanding.
So is it your understanding that if compliance is met, there's no damage to farmers? Is that correct?
I'd say that is one indicator.
What would be the other indicators?
Other indicators would be in the model results. Is that what we're speaking to?
Well, you're the one that said other indicators, so you tell me.
Well, I think in the case that we're looking at model results, if there was a substantial increase to water quality in addition, some long period shift of water quality, that could be something to evaluate and look into further.
I appreciate you defending your client by saying a significant increase, but I believe from your statements that you're not an agronomist or a soil scientist, you don't really know what amount of increase in salinity is bad for a crop, do you?
I can only speak to the sense of how to interpret the model results.
Is that a no?
I'm answering it the best way I can.
Okay. So are you aware of water quality violations at the South Delta compliance locations over the last 20 years?
Generally, yes.
And when you say generally, what does that mean?
I have an understanding that there have been exceedances of water quality at some locations in the South Delta.
Do you know if there have been 1,000 or more exceedances over the past 20 years?
I do not have a specific number.
Do you know the degree of exceedance at those locations?
I do not have a specific number.
Okay. Do you know if any farmers in the South Delta have adverse impacts due to salinity when the water quality standards are being met?
Okay. So, again, I apologize. Could you speak quickly for me? If you could re-say that question. I know you've been doing this, and I apologize for requesting it.
I'm not trying to be too fast, but obviously I get fast sometimes. I apologize. Do you know if farmers in the South Delta experience crop damage due to salinity when the salinity standards are being met?
I do not.
Do you know if higher salinity during the early stages of crop growth is more destructive than later in the season?
I do not.
Do you know whether or not soil scientists base crop resistance on season averages, not on any shorter period of average?
I'm going to object as asked and answered. All these questions seem to go to an agronomist knowledge, and he stated he doesn't have that. So
I appreciate that.
Seems like we're belaboring the point here.
I'm not trying to belabor the point, but Mr. Micko was very honest in saying he's not an agronomist or soil scientist, but then he made the statement that there might be problems if he saw a significant increase in the modeling, and I'm going through what significant may or may not be.
I'll just ask you to, I think the point has been made, so.
Okay.
Thank you.
So let me stay with you, Mr. Micko, and maybe I'll go back to Dr. Sadat after the question, but let's build a hypothetical. So the current situation is that the the calcium-2 results are monthly numbers, and they're put into the DSM-2 model for those runs to occur, correct?
That is how I presented the modeling framework. Yes.
Okay. So let's just do a hypothetical month. The Sacramento River flow averages 25,000 CFS per day. Okay, you understand that?
In a hypothetical situation.
Yes.
I understand what you're saying.
And let's just assume that in the hypothetical that the actual flow during that month, sometimes it's 20,000 CFS and sometimes it's 30,000 CFS, okay?
Okay.
And so that 25 to 30 range in the hypo resulted in the 25,000 average monthly flow of the river, correct?
I agree with your calculations.
Okay. Now, if DSM-2 modeled the time of the lower flow, the 20,000 CFS, not the average, but the lower 20,000 CFS, would the DSM-2 results be different than when they modeled the average number?
I'm having a hard time understanding how this hypo is being connected to testimony presented by panel 3.
Say that again. I didn't hear that.
I'm having a tough time understanding how this hypothetical is connected with testimony presented in panel 3.
Okay, well, to be funny here, that's irrelevant.
Mr. Micko, please answer the question to the
Okay.
best of your ability.
Okay. With the best of my ability, in a hypothetical situation, which is not being considered in this modeling analysis where we're using the best available data, I can go on and on, but I don't want to belabor the point. A difference of inflow in the delta could, and I'm sorry, Mr. Hart, did you ask a question about water quality or flow? Yeah, sorry, Mike.
I asked you if DSM-2 was modeling the lower flow from those averages we talked about, the 20,000 CFS from the Sacramento River. Would its results be different than when it modeled the average, which was 25,000 CFS over the month?
I would have to say that that would depend on all the situations involved in the delta. So if there's a tidal signal that can shift with time, depends on how long that low flow lasts. Depends if the modeled average is a representation of what's occurring throughout that month, and then the fact that we're evaluating the results based off of those monthly averages and making assessments based off of that. I guess, sorry, I'm going off the point too.
Yes.
Yes,
Let me say that's a very
there-
good answer for the petitioner. But the question is, and it's inherent in what you do, right? If the flows are lower during a certain amount of time, that'll produce different results in DSM-2 than it would when you did the average, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so the maximum and minimum effects on EC produced by the DSM-2 model would be affected if the model had used the actual numbers of inflow rather than the average numbers, correct? We don't know what that would be, but they would be different.
We don't have actual numbers.
We don't have actual numbers for inflow into the delta?
Not for planning simulations where you have to rely on the calcium-2 model to establish a base to have an evaluation of the system without a project, and then compare that to another simulation with a project.
Okay, well, we've been over this, but if you took 20 years of actual data, that could be a base for analysis, couldn't it? It doesn't have to be calcium-2. Calcium-2 is a planning thing that deals with exports and operations, not with effects on South Delta farmers, correct?
There's a lot to that question. So apologies. Is there a way you could say it a little more simply for me?
I'll leave it at that. Let me see if I can move on here. Dr. Sadat, I believe last week when we were discussing this, you referenced your testimony that says, let me find it here real quick, I'm sorry, where the DSM-2 is operated to meet DSM-2 is operated to meet the water quality objectives, and I don't want to qualify that incorrectly, but most of the time, or something like that. Do you recall that? I'm having trouble finding the quote here.
If you could find the page number, that would help.
I think I said it wrong there. Page 5 of Sites 110. On line 12, you say calcium-2 prioritizes meeting the D1641 water quality objectives for all scenarios. Correct? You see where it says that?
Yes, I see that.
Whether for you or for Mr. Micco, can either one of you explain to me how calcium-2 adjusts or includes changes in operations to meet the Southern Delta salinity requirements?
I could start, but maybe someone from is more expert in calcium could add, or so we have these artificial neural networks in calcium that they have the flow and salinity relationship. They define flow and salinity relationship, and this DSM-2 is used to train this ANN and this tool is used in calcium to estimate the salinity or just the flow that is needed to reach that salinity standard objective. And that's my
Yeah.
understanding. And if anyone else want to add to it,
Well, let me follow up question to that. What in calcium 2 is being adjusted to meet the Southern Delta salinity objectives? Does calcium 2 have any flow input on the San Joaquin River?
that would be a question for calcium.
Do you know if project operations, and by project, I mean CVP and SWP, do you know if at any time in the past 20 years, exports have been decreased in order to improve water quality in South Delta?
Is this a question for me or calcium
For
folks?
you,
Um,
for you.
I'm sorry, could you please rephrase the question?
Do you know if at any time in the last 20 years, the CVP and or SWP have decreased their exports in order to improve water quality in the South Delta?
I don't have that information.
Mr. Miko, do you know?
Off the top of my head.
Okay. Do you have any response to how calcium 2 would be prioritizing meeting of the Southern Delta water quality salinity standards?
Calcium 2 will be prioritizing meeting the water quality. So the calcium 2 model, as Mr. Herrick, I believe, as you know, is estimates salinity at specific locations in the delta that are identified as the most controlling or constraining for meeting water quality requirements. Those locations, and Mr. Whittington can be specific on them, are, I believe, mainly in the western and central delta, and can change its operations to meet those. I am not familiar with specific operations or decisions that the model makes to meet water quality requirements in the South Delta. I assume that there are some that are incorporated into the model, but maybe Mr. Whittington can add on to that.
Well, I appreciate your honesty. Let me explore that just a little further. Isn't it true that the calcium 2 makes no operational adjustments to meet the water quality standard at Tracy Old River? Isn't that true? None. Remember, you're under oath, Mr. Miko.
Well, my answer would have to be, I don't know then.
Is there any calcium 2 representative on this panel that understands the South Delta salinity problems and the operations of the projects? That was kind of a nasty question. Maybe I should rephrase that. Is there any other panelist who can better answer the question as to what, if any, calcium 2 does operationally to improve water quality at the Tracy Old River compliance location?
I do keep getting caught up on the word improved. I do know that there are flow requirement standards at Vernalis that could apply to water quality.
Does calcium 2 deal with those?
Flow standards at San Joaquin
Vernalis?
Yes.
I'm sorry, that was a little overlap. I didn't quite get that. Does calcium 2 deal with those?
Yes, and there's an overlap because we were both agreeing, so that's good.
And do you know, Mr. Miko, if the Bureau or DWR intentionally increases flows at Vernalis in order to improve water quality at the Tracy Old River compliance location?
I do not know.
Okay. Okay. And Dr. Sadat, do you know if DWR and or the Bureau of Reclamation takes any actions to improve water quality when there are exceedances in the South Delta?
I don't know about that.
Would that be important to know when you're trying to analyze the impacts of this project on South Delta water quality?
I'm just comparing two scenarios. baseline and alternative. And that's my understanding. And they will operate to not make an impact on water quality. So I don't know the details. I'm not an expert
But you're assuming that the
on that
project,
matter, and if DWR is operating to meet those criteria. So I'm not an expert to say something about anything about that. I just do the modeling based on the scenarios,
Okay,
based on an alternative.
okay, when you include that in your answer, then I have to clarify that. You're assuming then, I believe you just said, that DWR and or the Bureau undertake some sort of operational changes in order to meet water quality standards in the South Delta. Is that your assumption?
That's how I would think.
I'm
That's
asking
how
you
I
if that's
think
your
it would
assumption.
be. That's how I think it would be.
Is your assumption that they do that? You keep changing the words on me, no offense. Do you assume in your analyses you've done that DWR and or the Bureau make operational changes to improve water quality in the South Delta when violations occur?
No, I misspoke. So I meant my understanding is that they would. I misspoke by saying I assumed.
That they would? You mean, does that mean in the future, they do now or have in the past? Could you clarify that?
My understanding is that they would operate to meet the water quality objectives. And
Well,
they have done this in the past based on the tables that DWR provides, meeting the 1641 compliance. And in reality, it seems that they have been able to meet those objectives most of the time.
I don't know how to answer that. It's your understanding that, well, let me back up. When we're analyzing the effects of the potential effects of the site's project, is it useful to look at information that deals with extremely wet years, flood years? Does that give us any information that's relevant to this?
We look at the results based on the water year type.
That's not what I asked you. Does it make any sense to examine high flow years when water quality standards are not at risk?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. Could you rephrase it?
If we're in a wet year, let's say it's one of those flood years that we have, that's what we call them anyway. So there's plenty of water coming down the rivers all year. So water quality standards, no matter where you're looking, are not at risk. So what's the purpose of analyzing the project's effect in those years if there's really no issue about meeting water quality standards?
I mean, so we are looking at trends, and within that 82 years, there are wet years, there are dry years, there are critically dry years, and we look at the trends over long term, and also we break it down by water year type. So we are interested to see what's happening on each of those water year types.
So you're interested in seeing the effects of the site's project in years when water quality standards are not threatened. You're interested in that?
That doesn't hurt.
What's the purpose of that? What does it tell us?
We just want to be more, I don't know, we are looking at the results, and it's just we want to make sure that we are not seeing any impacts in wet years or dry years or above normal years. So it's just a very standard procedure that we look at all those year types.
Wouldn't it be more?
I don't have any specific answer to that question. I'm sorry.
Where are we going with this, Mr. Herrick?
Well, our previous answer, talked about, how on average and the impacts during our trends of impacts. And I'm trying to get at the point that analysis of times when there aren't any threats to water quality don't move the needle forward. The important part would be to analyze times when water quality is threatened. And then that would tell us whether or not the project potentially might adversely affect legal users of water. And the very competent modelers on this panel keep explaining to me why they don't want to look at that stuff and how it doesn't mean anything. So I'm trying to explore that, but I can move on if the hearing officer understands the point.
I do. Thank you.
Okay. Excuse me. Nations on excuse me, keep coughing here. Dr. Sadat, do you know whether or not the water quality objectives in the South Delta apply just at the compliance locations or whether it applies throughout the channel?
Objection beg.
I can rephrase it, but I don't know how it's vague.
The channel objectives at compliance points. Let's be specific.
Dr. Sadat, do you understand that there are 3 interior South Delta EC standards?
Are you talking about the compliance locations?
Well, there are compliance locations, but those are compliance locations associated with water quality objectives. And so the question is, are you aware that there are 3 water quality objectives in the South Delta? And the next question will deal with where those are.
The 3 water quality objectives, so are you like referring to the locations, like the Old River at Tracy Road is like, that's what you're referring to, those locations?
Let me start over. Dr. Sadat, are you aware that there's a salinity standard measured in EC designated at the Tracy Old River Bridge in Old River?
Yes, I do understand that.
And you're aware that there's one at the junction, I'll say, of Old River and Middle River?
Yes,
And are you aware that there's a salinity standard at Brant Bridge on the San Joaquin River?
yes, I'm aware of those.
Are you aware of whether or not those standards, as measured at those compliance locations, also apply throughout the entire channels of the South Delta?
I mean, I'm not sure what, like, this would be probably the best to be answered by calcium because those assumptions are implemented in calcium.
I asked you if you were aware. So it's
Well, I'm
either-
not aware of how
Okay.
that's modeled in calcium.
Are you aware of any areas in the South Delta that typically have worse water quality than other areas?
Generally, I have, yes, a general understanding of the water quality in South.
Where would those areas be that have worse water quality than other places?
Objection beg as to water quality.
EC.
Well, it's my understanding that EC is higher, like in San Joaquin River as compared to Sacramento River. Sacramento River water is generally fresher than San Joaquin River.
Can you be more I was trying to make you draw the comparison between areas in the South Delta that have worse water quality EC than other areas within the South Delta. So let me try that again. Can you specify any areas in the South Delta channels that typically have worse water quality than the other areas in the South Delta channels?
I can't recall. No.
Okay. So that would mean then that in your analysis, you didn't apply or produce any model results for any of those areas that might experience higher water quality naturally or typically?
We evaluated the results at South Delta, like salinity results in South Delta, whatever location the results was available. So regardless of the amount of salinity, regardless of whether it is higher or lower, we evaluated all those results.
Okay, but your testimony doesn't include any specifics regarding, I'll just call them trouble spots in the South Delta, correct?
The water quality compliance exceedance, they have results for Old River at Tracy Road, for example, and all those compliance locations at Brand Bridge and Old River near Middle River. So we evaluated those results.
You did not put those results in your testimony. There's no compliance curves for the South Delta compliance locations in your testimony, is there?
It's not in my testimony, but they are presented in Appendix 6B5.
Okay.
And those are available.
So again, it's not in your testimony, correct?
Asked and answered. Objection.
Sustained.
Okay, let's do one more hypothetical. Dr. Sadat, let's assume that the tidal inflow, and that means the tide coming in the South Delta, is 2,000 CFS going up Middle River. Okay, you understand that?
Okay.
I'm just building a hypo, so I'm going to make sure you understand as we go along. And so that means that the volume of that channel carries the 2,000 CFS, correct?
Assuming there's no more flow and it's only tide coming in.
Yeah, we're just looking at the tide coming in, what that tide is. And then the another part of this hypo is that DSM-2 has the channel configured so that 2,000 CFS does go through it, correct? Or you understand that?
I understand that.
Okay. Now in the hypothetical, let's say a hypothetical project results in 500 CFS less flow up Middle River due to the exports associated with that project, okay?
Okay.
Okay. So 500 is 25% of 2,000, correct? So 25% less flow under the project in this hypo. 25% less flow is going up Middle River, okay?
Mr. Hurd, just for clarification purposes, because I'm trying to follow along as well. So we have flow going, I guess I'm going to go ahead and say south on Old River of minus 2,000 CFS.
No.
Okay.
I'm on Middle River.
On Middle River. Oh,
Yes. I'm not trying to get
Okay.
too complicated by going through the hydrodynamics of the entire area because we don't have time for that. But
Okay. Appreciate that.
that's right. The hypo is Middle River's flow. And I'm just picking these numbers. They're doesn't matter, but the 2,000 is close to reality. But
Okay.
so I'm just picking these numbers. So anyway, if a project that includes extra exports decreases that inflow on the tide by 500 CFS, that's a decrease of 25%, correct?
Right. Yes.
Now, let's change the hypo and say the channel now only takes 1,000 CFS of incoming flow on Middle River. You understand that?
Yes, I understand.
And that's due to degradation of the channel due to silt buildup in various areas, if not all the areas. But buildup of silt is now creating resistance. So the water flowing in, there's only 1,000 CFS on the incoming tide. Is that clear?
I understand that.
Okay. Now, if that same hypothetical export project increases or decreases that inflow by 500 CFS, now that project's taking 50% of that flow, not 25%. You understand that?
Can you please repeat the last part? I lost all the numbers in my head. So last numbers were?
Well, let me start over since I don't know what the last means. But so under the hypothetical, the project that decreases the tidal inflow by 500 CFS is now decreasing the tidal flow in Middle River by 50%, not by 25%, because 500 is 50% of 1,000, correct?
Right.
Now, in your opinion, between those two scenarios, would the results of a DSM-2 for stage be any different?
Sorry, I'm confused. Are we talking about EC or stage?
I just said stage. So the first scenario, the project is decreasing the inflow of 2,000 by 500. The second scenario, the project is decreasing the inflow from 1,000 to 500. And my question to you is, would you expect the DSM-2 modeling results for stage to be any different between those two?
I mean, that depends on many other factors. In DSM-2, it depends what's happening in other parts of the delta, what's the situation of other channels. I mean, DSM-2 is a complex of channels, and what are the flows coming in, flow in San Joaquin River, and many other factors. It's not just that simple to say just one change in one channel could make a difference in stage or not.
Well, isn't that what we do? We try to hold other factors steady and then make certain changes. So let's say all those other factors are held steady. So that the question still remains, wouldn't your DSM-2 results be different if the project's effect on Middle River flow changes from 25% to 50%?
Well, I just don't understand how we could do that in DSM-2 to fix every other thing and just evaluate one channel, change in one channel. It's just a connected like situation. All the channels are connected and it all depends.
Well, let's go with that. So if they're interconnected channels, then are you assuming then that if the 2,000 CFS is not going up Middle River, now it's 1,000, that the channel will then be filled from a different direction?
Sorry, I'm not following the question.
So with caveats, are you not willing to say that a change in tidal inflow in one channel wouldn't result in different DSM-2 outputs modeling that?
I'm saying it depends.
Okay, so it could affect it, right?
Under hypothetical situation, which I don't believe that sites would operate to make any changes to surface water level. Under hypothetical situation, if the flow is less, then the water level would be different.
And the same might be true for EC, water quality, correct?
That also, I mean, depends because we are talking about EC, like it's the concentration, and when the water coming in, if the EC in like when the water has the same like salinity concentration, I don't see why that would affect the EC.
Okay, Dr. Sadat, do you have an understanding as to the source of the salinity in the South Delta?
I have a general understanding, yes.
And is that salinity in the South Delta related to the ocean salinity, or is it related to the San Joaquin River salinity?
I believe both.
Okay. Do you have any feel for the degree to which it's controlled by one or the other?
No, I do not know that.
So do you have an opinion as to whether additional exports under the site's project might collect more San Joaquin River salts in the South Delta than without the project?
So when you're exporting water, it's water with the same salinity concentration, EC concentration. So how,
Well, do you understand that the agricultural barriers in the South Delta installed each year are made of rock?
I learned that when you mentioned it last time.
Okay. Do you have an understanding as to whether or not those leak? In other words, water does flow backwards, even though they're made to prevent that? Backwards, I mean downstream. Sorry.
I don't have detailed information about those barriers. I know they exist. I know we included those in our modeling, and I know when they operate and when they're installed, but I don't have much information about them.
Okay. So is it correct to say that you don't know whether or not additional exports change the location of, let me start over. This is getting complicated. Do you know whether or not increased exports affect where high salinity areas in the South Delta are?
I'm gonna object as to vague. Increase compared to what?
Maybe-
Dr. Sadat, do you know whether or not increased exports alter salinity levels at various locations in the South Delta, at any locations in the South Delta? I'll put it that way.
So when you're saying alter, what do you mean exactly?
Well, let's just hypothetically say that there's a bad area around Tracy Old River Bridge that is higher salinity than the rest of the area during summer. Okay, that's the hypo. In your
Okay.
opinion, does increased exports affect the location of that higher area that I just mentioned?
The location of that higher area?
Yes, in other words, does it move according to the level of exports?
So like you're saying by increasing the exports, whether the location that has higher salinity will move in the delta, is that the question?
That's the question.
Location. I mean, that would depend where this location is and how it's impacted by the export, the distance and
No, it's not the how it's impact. I'm asking you if there's an impact, the location.
I can't answer that question on
Okay.
top of my head.
Dr. Sadat, are you aware of any null zones in the South Delta? And by null zones, I mean areas which on a daily average don't have flushing. The water goes back and forth and never leaves the area.
I'm aware, yes, no zones.
Okay, I think this is for Mr. Micko. I'm not sure. Do you know how much additional water under the site's project would be applied to lands in the CVP service area in the San Joaquin Valley?
I don't have a specific number for you.
Does the modeling you produced have the number in it?
Well, to be clear, Mr. Whittington's testimony is about the modeling results.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. No need to apologize.
Mr. Whittington, do you know how much additional water, if any, due to the site's project will be applied to lands in the CVP service area in the San Joaquin Valley?
Not offhand.
Does your modeling include that result?
I'm sorry, I missed that answer. The first answer.
I think he said not offhand.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. So does your modeling include those numbers or that number?
It might, but I also am not sure offhand if it does. I would expect that it would be included in the final report, though.
Okay, I'm being funny here, hearing officer. What do you mean it might? Didn't anybody model that? You don't know?
I'll jump in. Yes, it is included in the final EIR. Yes.
Okay.
There's a modeled increase in deliveries too.
So for either Mr. Micko or Mr. Whittington, do you know how much, if any, additional salts would go from the CVP service area into the San Joaquin River as a result of this project?
In evaluation of the model results, the concentration of salinity is the same at the export facilities, specifically at Jones Pumping Plant.
Okay, non-responsive, if I may be critical here. I'm
Sorry?
asking you if that doesn't answer the question.
Okay.
The question is, do you
Apologize.
know how much, some quantity of salts, additional salts will reach the San Joaquin River as a result of the sites project's additional applied water in the CVP service area?
I'm gonna object, assumes facts, not evidence.
I'm just asking him if he knows and if those are possibilities.
Which facts are not in evidence, Mr. Ferguson? Which
Oh,
fact?
if there would be, he rephrased the original question
Okay.
to assume that there would be salt increases. Rather than using if any when he originally stated it. But
I see.
Okay,
So-
I'll do it again.
Thank you.
Again, this is for Mr. Micko and Mr. Whittington, depending on who might answer that. Are you aware of any additional applied water in the CVP service area in the San Joaquin Valley resulting from the sites project?
Well, I'll jump in and Mr. Whittington can follow up. I would assume yes, because I do recall there being an increase in deliveries to the CVP service area south of the Delta. So I'd have to assume it's in the San Joaquin. And
Okay,
then-
that's good.
Okay.
Do you know if the application of that additional water due to sites in the CVP service area will cause additional salts to reach the San Joaquin River?
Do I know if that is in the model?
Do I know if that occurred? Do you know if that occurs?
Okay. I'm gonna,
The next question would be in the model.
okay. I'm not familiar with the specifics of the ag runoff in the San Joaquin Valley.
Does the model include outputs that estimate any runoff of salts to the San Joaquin River from the application of the site's water to the CVP service area, if any?
There's a complex set of regressions that are used to evaluate the change in salinity at Vernalis. So I assume that there may be a change. There may be a change to salinity with a change in runoff from certain water users in the San Joaquin Valley. I don't know if Mr. Whittington has any more specifics he'd like to add on to that.
Yeah, all I can add is I'm not sure if there are calculations that I think consider the effects of salinity, but I don't think we have any outputs in that region.
So if that's the case, there aren't any outputs. Would it be correct to say then that the analysis then includes no treatment of any additional new Melones water necessary to dilute that additional salt, if any?
Yeah, I'm not sure the answer to that question. I'd have to look into the code.
Do you know if any of your calcium 2 inputs to DSM-2 included any additional salt load in the San Joaquin River reaching the South Delta as a result of the project?
I'm not sure.
Who would know that?
I am also not sure.
Dr. Sadat, did your modeling of DSM-2 for the project and without, for the project and without project include any additional salt loading from the San Joaquin River?
Are you talking about like a mass of salt?
Salt load, yes.
In DSM-2, DSM-2 doesn't include, I mean, all these, okay, let me think about it. Salt load. Sorry, I can't answer that question offhand right now. I have to look, but yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay. Okay, Madam Hearing Officer, do you want to take a break? I have a few remaining calcium 2 questions, if that's all right, and then I'm done. But it's 10:30 and I don't want to push it or not push it or what?
I think that's a good idea, Mr. Herrick. Let's go ahead and take a break. Let's see, we can do 13 minutes, so that will be 10:45. We'll come back on the record. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, it is 10:45. I'll look to our court reporter. Are you ready to go back on the record?
I'm here. Thank you. Ready to
Great.
go.
Thank you. I will turn things back over to you, Mr. Herrick.
Thank you. I just noticed that cross-examination increases one's blood sugar level, apparently. That's a proto, never mind.
I believe it.
Damn it. Okay, the next set of questions, I'll be done quickly, I hope. These are for Mr. Micko, Mr. Winnington, I believe, because they're deal with calcium too. So I don't know which one of you to ask. I apologize for that, but what's the maximum rate of additional exports under the project?
You say maximum rate of additional exports?
Yeah, the rate, not the volume.
So are you saying what the maximum capacity at the pumping facilities are?
No, what's the maximum additional export pumping rate with the project? In other words, at some point, the project makes releases from sites to go down to the Delta to get re-exported, correct? Under certain circumstances.
Under certain conditions, yeah.
So I'm just asking, what's the maximum rate under those times?
I apologize in advance. You may not like this answer, but we evaluate the trends, over the course of the simulation period, and I don't recall evaluating, the difference between a no project and alternative at one instance. So I don't know if I have a maximum rate for you offhand. Mr. Whittington, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add on to that.
No, I don't think so. I agree with Steve, and I don't think I'd be comfortable providing an estimate on what I think the maximum increase was.
Does the calcium, I don't know, outputs or data have a monthly average number of that rate?
Yes.
Okay. But that would be different than the maximum, correct? Maximum under real-time operations.
Well, it's simulated on a monthly time step.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is that correct that the time during those additional exports is July through November?
Yes.
And does the calcium model include other transfer water such that the export rates would be higher than just normal exports?
That's for lower U-boat river accord water.
Or any transfer?
Yeah, that is one that I'm citing. Yes.
Yes. And that's based on historic numbers from when?
I don't believe it's historic numbers. It's an estimated operation depending on water year type. It's my understanding, but you're kind of going into the cobwebs in my brain on that operation.
Okay, and then the calcium 2 ANN, could you briefly explain what that is, just as a, laying the groundwork here for the couple questions?
Yeah, that ANN stands for artificial neural network, and it's the way that calcium can approximate what the salinity conditions would be based on monthly average flows.
And are those ANN, I'll say inputs, whether the results are inputs, are they used to determine exports versus carryover storage in the relevant reservoirs?
They're used to determine flows that are required to meet salinity conditions at some select locations. So those locations specifically are Sacramento River at Edmonton, Sacramento River at Collinsville, Sacramento River at Chips Island, San Joaquin River at Jersey Point, and there's also one in Old River at Rock Slough.
But then does that data then determine what calcium says are exports, or does DSM-2 determine exports?
That information is used to assist calcium in determining operations for exports.
And again, it's just a planning device, but it's the method by which plans for levels of exports are determined, correct?
Yes.
And can you explain how the calcium 2 deals with future water quality needs? And by future, I mean, let's just take the subsequent year to the current year in which it's operating.
Yeah, it has it forecasts starting in January. It does forecasts of allocations that are then finalized by May. So the model will finalize its determination of water allocation by that month of May.
And how does it determine how much water to leave in storage for the subsequent year's water quality needs, or expected water quality needs, I guess?
I don't recall.
Okay, but it makes some determination, right? That says, we will leave X amount
Right.
in each reservoir for next year, correct?
Sure. Yeah. Yes.
And is that amount based, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I didn't have much to add, just to say that, yeah, there are storage objectives by the end of the year.
Okay. And does that projected storage for the next year, does that anticipate a critically dry year or an average year or wet year or something else?
No. But yeah, the water year types are also not established until spring. Or sorry, the model will have water year type forecasts, but of course, that's not going to be known until the end of the year.
Can you give
Sorry,
us
you may need to repeat the question. I didn't answer that one very well.
That's right. I don't know if there's an answer. Do you have a feel for how calcium 2 determines that carryover? In other words, if it stopped raining for 12 months, you might have serious water quality needs, 12 months hence. But calcium 2 is not planning for that worst case scenario. Is that correct? I don't know if I said that clearly.
Well, I mean, calcium includes the storage and outflow regulations that would all be included in the regulatory environment of based on Reclamation's 2020 benchmark modeling. So the model is just operating to whatever the regulations are prescribed under that 2020 baseline. And there's a lot that goes into it, I guess.
Yeah, and when you say regulations, you don't mean a regulatory agency. You mean bureaus, operating rules for having exports or something like that, right?
Yeah, along those lines.
Okay, so calcium 2 never says, I'm going to shut down exports to 500 CFS total because next year might be a drought, right?
I don't think it specifically includes that assumption.
Well, assumptions like that. I mean, a significant decrease in exports in case the following year is a certain type. Does it do that?
Yeah, again, I'll just go back to it. It includes the regulations that were included in the 2020 reclamation benchmark model. And so that baseline assumption or that baseline model includes operational rules that were developed in coordination between DWR and Reclamation to ensure that to provide insurance on water supply and water quality objectives would be met on a long-term basis.
Okay, you put those two together, water supply and water quality. Is it fair to say that the calcium 2 planning model has a preference for some level of exports?
Objection, vague preference.
Can you explain? I think you can explain what you mean, Mr. Herrick.
Does the calcium 2 model have in its calculations a method by which a certain minimum of exports will occur.
Yes.
Mr. Miko, you say in your testimony on page 4, paragraph 12, and I don't have the number of your testimony there. Sorry, I'm not trying to, do you have that page? Page 4, paragraph 12 of yours?
I'll have to load it up. I can do that right now, but it may help the whole group for us to look at it. So I'll see.
Yeah, good idea. Sorry.
So that's cites 108, I believe, is Mr. Miko's testimony.
Thank you, Hearing Officer Kenzie.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Once in a while, I'm prepared. Just not in this case.
And we're bringing up cites 108 on which page? Did you know, Mr. Herrick?
Yes, page 12, excuse me, page 4, paragraph 12.
Thank you.
And you can see that quote there. I'll read it real fast. When system-wide storage levels are at or near dead pool, also described as stressed water supply conditions, the calcium 2 model results should only be an indicator of stressed water supply conditions. Calcium 2 results should not necessarily be understood to reflect actually what would occur under a stressed water supply condition. In actual operations, calcium 2 results, e.g. near dead pool, would be avoided by making policy decisions. And Mr. Miko, you've been asked questions on this before, but those conditions of stressed water supply conditions, that includes times that resulted in TUCPs in the past, correct?
TUCP may be taken in response to a stress water supply condition.
Yeah, I don't mean to confuse that. I just mean that when things get so bad, I think you're saying here that the calcium 2 results shouldn't necessarily be taken as, scripture, because policy decisions will be made as to what to do, and rather than drain the reservoir.
That sound, well, I guess, is there a question there?
Well, I just want to make sure I'm understanding that correctly. Is that a fair summary?
To me right now, that sounds like a fair summary.
Okay. So is there any modeling done by you gentlemen that deals with those instances where we've reached that stressed water supply condition?
Could you be more specific, please? Like deals with?
In any year of the 82-year model, were there instances where the calcium model that you've performed here, butted into a condition where it was stressed water supply conditions, and so the modeling wasn't necessarily what was going to happen?
I think there were times where the water supply condition was approaching stressed.
And so do we have any information in the record that would tell us what operations would be during those times?
Could you rephrase that, please?
Well, is it correct to say that if we reached stressed water conditions, they're not going to drain the reservoirs and shut the export pumps off? Is that a reasonable statement?
I don't want to speculate as a modeler.
Well, in your modeling, did the model results show any time when exports went to zero, or let's start with that. Did any time when exports went to zero?
I don't believe there was a time when exports went to zero, and I could look to Mr. Whittington to confirm that.
Can you confirm that, Mr. Whittington?
Yeah, I can confirm that.
Was there any time in the modeling when the calcium 2 showed that, a particular reservoir would be brought below dead pool storage?
I don't believe so.
So how do we evaluate the effects of this project during such times when the stressed water condition exists?
So, well, I guess I'm a little bit confused by the couple questions that we just covered. So I apologize, Mr. Herrick. Could you?
It's okay.
Yeah.
You can say that this is not correct, but I'm going on the assumption in these questions that, okay, we will have, critical situations in the future, as we have in the past, where, as you say, the CalSim model shouldn't be relied upon necessarily because policy decisions will take over. And so the question to you is, do we have any method before us in these hearings to evaluate what might happen during those times when CalSim 2 really isn't reliable?
We may. I don't have an answer in terms of the calcium 2 model though.
Okay. But when you say you may, apparently it won't include zero exports, correct?
I avoided answering that question because I don't want to speculate.
Okay. Mr. Whittington? The current modeling has no instances of zero exports. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Does the calcium 2 ANN, the neural network, consider South Delta salinity during stressed water supply conditions as defined by Mr. Miko?
Is it considered?
Yeah, does it make any provision for South Delta salinity?
Yes, I believe so.
And how does it do that?
Well, I don't know how explicit it does that, but it operates to the flow objectives that are included based on the compliance locations that I discussed earlier.
And those compliance locations are, this is a general statement, more Western Delta than Southern Delta, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Just one last set of questions here. Is there something defined as case 3 under CalSim where the model thinks that no matter what combination of decreased exports and increased flow, standards will not be met? Does that ring a bell to anybody? I'm not trying to trick you there.
Case 3 does not ring a bell for me.
I apologize. I probably need more context to help out.
That's right. I'm sorry. I don't want to get too far afield. We'll address this later. That's all the questions I have. Thank you for your consideration, Hearing Officer Kenzie. I hope I wasn't too rude or flippant with any of the panel members, and I appreciate all their answers.
Thank you, Mr. Herrick, and thank you to the panel. With that, I believe we have, I will turn to Mr. King. I see you. I think,
Yes.
Do you have questions for this panel of witnesses?
Yes, I do.
And
Excuse me,
Hold on.
Excuse
Hearing
me.
Officer Kinsey.
yes, Ms. Meserve. I'm sorry.
sorry to-
You had some questions.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Yes, I just had a few questions for this panel. If I might do that on behalf of San Joaquin County before we move to the next protestant.
Of course, and I apologize, Mr. King. Ms. Meserve, please go ahead.
Thank you. My first questions are for Mr. Winslow. And I'm just going to refer to your testimony, which is at sites 111C. And if Ms. Mullen would like to bring that up, it may be helpful. Or if she wouldn't mind bringing it up, I should say.
Sure thing. Sites 111C, please.
Thank you. The first question I have, Mr. Winslow, relates to paragraph 8 of that testimony, which is on page 3. It explains there in your testimony, Mr. Winslow, that the model simulations were conducted over the 82 period of record, 1921 to 2003. My question is it your impression that the conditions of recent years not included in the modeling, October 2003 onward, are generally similar to the time period used for the analysis?
I think the 82-year period encompasses a range that includes recent events. There might be differences in frequency of extreme events, but the point of using the 82-year period is to maintain consistency with an accepted large range of historic hydrologic conditions.
And in your opinion, have factors such as air temperature not noticeably changed compared to the period of record that was considered?
The period of record that was modeled for the EIR did not account for warming climate. That analysis was specifically done post 2023. And I testified to some of that material in my testimony.
Thank you. Now I have a question about paragraph 14, which is on page 5. This paragraph discusses model simulations. It talks about the outlets that were used and the closest available outlet to the water surface, in particular, not being used because of HABs concerns. Can you explain, Mr. Winslow, how HABs concerns were defined for purposes of your modeling efforts?
Yes, we conducted some sensitivity studies to assume that the upper 10 meters of water were not available for withdrawal because of potential water quality issues, specifically the algal bloom and the associated bacteria. And so the way we did that in the model was just exclude the closest available gate if it was within 10 meters of the water surface. So you're pulling deeper water, and that's the comment there, that it's generally much colder if you're pulling from the second available gate.
What I'm wondering, Mr. Winslow, was there a threshold that you were provided or used for what the HABs concern might be?
No, it was specifically to say if whatever the concern was, we couldn't use the top 10 meters of water, then what would the release temperature be under that scenario? It was a simple.
So thank you. So there's not anything specific you were provided in terms of a threshold on extent of HABs formation or anything specific to HABs?
Nothing specific in terms of constituent concentrations. Again, it was just the simple 10 meters, and that was applied on a seasonal basis. I don't recall the months offhand, but during the time when HABs have historically formed, something on the order of May through October, we implemented that restriction on the outlet gates.
I'm going to go now have a question about flexible operations with the CVP, which you did answer a few questions about that earlier. If we could, Ms. Mullen, pull up AHO 114. That's AHO 114, and page 47 is the page number I was hoping to look at. And this page number, Mr. Winslow, discusses the fact that alternative 3 assumes reclamation investment equivalent to 360,000 acre-feet of storage for operational flexibility. Do you see where it mentions that?
Yes.
Is that amount of that 360,000 acre feet, is that dependent on the 25% Bureau of Reclamation share in sites?
I can't speak to that detail. I was provided results from the calcium and the USR DOM models that were used as inputs to the CEQUAL model, the water quality model for the reservoir. I don't know the details of the different allocations, if you will, of the water, aside from the fact that I know that we did do a 25% reclamation scenario, and that is the alternative 3.
And isn't it true that the current investment by reclamation is 9%?
Again, I don't have that detail. I just know that we've run multiple scenarios. One was 25%. I believe another was 16%, but that doesn't affect the lake water quality modeling, assuming that the boundary conditions are the same. So if the time series of flow remains the same, it doesn't matter to the lake who accounts for the water or who owns the water or where the water's going. We're just modeling the hydraulics of the lake for a given time series of inflows and outflows.
With respect to and I guess if there's anyone else on the panel that would like to answer, I'm not sure, Mr. Winslow, perhaps you're not the right person, but my question is, without a higher investment from the Bureau of, going up from 9%, would sites expect to have the operational flexibility to manage for a problem like HABs, for instance?
So I believe the range of simulations we ran have different kind of utilization ratios, if you will, of the reservoir. So one has an average outflow of roughly 220,000 acre feet per year, and another one has an average outflow of closer to 270,000, I believe. So to the extent that one of the users would have their percentage reduced or increased, to the extent that it's within the range of another alternative we've run, we could use that to kind of look at the potential impacts. But we did not do anything specifically for a 7% change in reclamation's share of the water.
And so you're not sure if 360,000 acre feet is the 25% investment, just to be clear?
I am not sure, but it doesn't affect the modeling.
The 25%, yeah, is reflective of the 360,000 acre feet. That would be considered as a sub account within sites reservoir for reclamation's investment.
Mr. Whittington, or can you provide a description of what the calcium model does to simulate the so-called CVP flex ops? And
yeah, it just considers that 25% of the site's reservoir storage is reclamation's water, and reclamation is able to utilize that water for increasing storage at Shasta, or for helping them make releases for fall flow stability objectives, or for spring pulse flow objectives, or for CVP deliveries.
but the modeling assumed a 25% investment by the Bureau, correct?
Yes.
Does the calcium 2 model simulate the exchange between sites in Shasta that you just referenced?
Yes.
And how does it do that?
The model tracks when sites water is released in lieu of Shasta releases, and then that volume of water is the volume of water that was released from sites would be assumed to have been backed up into Shasta. So it's credited basically for Shasta releases later on.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to Mr. Winslow. If we could pull up the testimony again, which was 111, Sites 111C. Ms. Mullen, thank you. Going to paragraphs 20 and 21, which is page 8. You discuss in your testimony the model temperature for releases for rice farming, which is 65 degrees, correct?
Yes, again, this was done kind of as a sensitivity study. There's nothing magical about exactly 65. That was implemented as a measure of optimal temperature, trying to hold that as a minimum.
And do you know what the optimal temperature for fish in the Sacramento River would be?
I do not. Again, we've run multiple sensitivity studies to address different questions that came up, and this was specifically one related to rice.
And were you asked to work with modeling around optimal temperatures for releases into YOLO bypass for fisheries?
I was not.
In your work on this project, were you ever asked to perform temperature modeling to ensure releases from the new reservoir would be appropriate for fish in the Sacramento River?
No, the temperature specific modeling was just for rice growing concerns.
Are you aware of any effort to use sites releases to cool Sacramento River water for salmon migration during the transfer window?
I am not aware of that. My assumption is that my understanding is the model can be optimized for different releases. The concept of cold water pool storage, right? So just like you would release Shasta, cold water for Shasta for fisheries, you could do something similar to the Sites Reservoir, but we have not been tasked with modeling optimization to target fisheries concerns in the SAC.
In terms of possible benefits to fish from the Sites Reservoir, is the only possible benefit you've worked on due to the exchanges of the Bureau with the Shasta water?
Well, my work is focused on the reservoir itself. And as I mentioned, the boundary conditions which drive the inflows and outflows to and from the reservoir, I'm not involved in developing those. Those were handed to me by other members on the project team. So I did not do anything specifically with changes to those boundary conditions. I just implement them in the model as they came to me.
Thank you. You could please take this one down, Ms. Mullen. I have a question for Mr. Whittington. And in your testimony, you mentioned YOLO bypass deliveries in paragraph 39. And in your work on this project, are you familiar with the configuration of the delta in terms of where the freshwater flows travel?
I guess I wouldn't say I have a strong expertise in that.
In your opinion, would you agree that sites releases to Yolo bypass would not freshen the central delta?
I I don't think I would have that opinion. No.
You disagree with that statement?
Yes, I disagree with having that opinion.
Do you know if the modeling assumed any freshening of the central delta when YOLO bypass deliveries are occurring?
I'm gonna object as a bag as far as freshening.
Can you be more specific, Ms. Mazur?
Sure. I mean, I think just to talk about a constituent, what I'm thinking about is salinity, for instance. And obviously San Joaquin County is concerned about, how fresh water is going to flow through the delta and whether less fresh water may flow through places within the county, channels within the county. So that's the reason for the question. Sounds like maybe I don't have the right. I only was asking you, Mr. Whittington, because you had talked about YOLO bypass deliveries, but is there anyone else on the panel who knows what the model assumed in terms of freshening of the central delta in terms of, let's say, salinity from those YOLO bypass deliveries?
To the extent,
Right, Kyle.
sorry, Steve. The DSM-2 model is a full salt balance model, and so any changes to boundary conditions that affected salt in the delta should be accounted for in the DSM-2 model.
And do you know whether it assumed freshening from those YOLO bypass releases?
The model is an accounting model. It doesn't assume it tracks salt under the driving forces of boundary conditions.
I'll move on. I just had a couple of questions for Mr. Micko. Let's see. So, you were asked a little bit about diversions at the Clifton Court Forebay and Jones pumping plant under the project conditions. In addition to the rediversions of what we could call sites water at those locations, are there other additional exports that would occur at those pumps as a result of the approval of this application?
Sorry, I don't fully understand that question.
I think what I'm trying to get at is about the additional diversions from the South Delta in addition to what we would call sites water. So it could be, I think, what you call transfer water in the operations plan.
And I'm gonna object as the form of a question. I'm not sure what the question was.
Are there additional diversion exports that would occur as a result of the approval of this application?
Are there additional exports?
Correct. Of beyond water that was that's stored in sites of the CVP water.
Sorry, I'm having a tough time parsing this out. I apologize.
Probably my fault. Sorry. What I'm trying to look for is an idea of the timing and magnitude of additional diversions that would be from transfer water.
I'm gonna object again there's not a question there.
There's not a quick, let me try I think the question is interesting as we're trying to get to. Let me try, and then Ms. Meserve, you can help me when I fare no better. Mr. Miko, according to your modeling efforts, would there be additional exports from the Delta pumps that includes water other than water stored within site's reservoir, as compared to without project?
I don't believe so. That's a very specific set of results to analyze, though.
Ms. Meserve, back to you. I don't know if that helped.
No, I think that was kind of the question I was trying to ask, and you did it better. And if they don't know the answer, then we'll have to think about that for rebuttal and other purposes. So thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you, Ms. Meserve. Thank you once again to the panel, although you're still not done. I think with that, I will turn to Mr. King, and if we can, there we have Mr. King. And Mr. King, would you like my team to give us, when you have 30 minutes left on your personal clock morning, or
I think, yeah, I think I'm going to use up most of my time today. So you can let me know when I have about 10 minutes left.
Okay.
Thank you. So thank you to the panel. I know you've been here for some time. I'm here to represent T&M King Farms. It's named after my great-grandparents who came in 1857 and settled and occupied Patman land near College City. Personally, I've been caring about stewardship and sustainability since I've been managing our farm for over 50 years. A member of the Cliffs County Resource Conservation District.
Mr. King,
I speak.
Mr. King,
yes.
This is not the time to testify. This is the time to ask questions, please.
Okay, I wanted to get perspective to the panel. So my first question is, if Ms. Mullins could bring up sites 278, page 16. I have a question for Mr. Whittington or Mr. Miko. Yeah.
And before I get into questioning, I'm afraid my blood sugar is dropping pretty precipitously right now. Would it be offensive to anyone here if I were to eat a snack?
It certainly would. Do you need a break, Mr. Miko?
I think I'll be okay if I have a snack.
Okay. Well, then I encourage you.
Okay.
I don't think anyone will be offended, but please do have a snack, and let me know if you need a break.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. King, back to you.
So, sites 278, page 16. So my question, and I believe it's for Mr. Whittington or Mr. Miko, concerns the Sutter bypass flow. And then my question is, how does the flows in the Molten Weir and Clusa bypass, actually, how do they get incorporated in your model? I'm assuming they get incorporated in the Sutter bypass, or is that a correct assumption?
We're spilling over those two, flows spilling over those two weirs go into the Sutter bypass.
Right. Okay. So if I look at your wet year, there's a difference between the sites project and without the sites project, and the difference is really a source of water that will come in from those two weirs. Isn't that correct? Because that's the source from Sacramento River through the Molten Weir and the Clusa Weir.
And Tisdale Weir, and there's also overflows at Ord Ferry that are considered.
Oh, Ord Ferry, okay, but Tisdale is much. Does that actually get into the Sutter bypass?
Yes,
it does. Okay, all right. So, do you have any estimate? Does your model have any estimate of what the difference in flows in Molten Weir and Clusa Weir would be?
Yes.
Okay, and do you know what those numbers are?
Not offhand.
Are they thousands or tens of thousands or acre feet or?
Well, yeah, I mean, sorry, not offhand. I'd have to, I guess we could make some assumptions based on these bar charts.
Will the Molten Weir flow, if the sites project is built with a molten wheel flow in your model?
Sorry, could you repeat that? I don't think I understood. With
sites project-
molten weir.
Yeah, if the sites project is completed and the diversions are carried out as anticipated to fill
Yeah.
the site's reservoir, will there still be flows in the molten weir?
Yes.
Okay, but they'll be reduced, is that right?
Yeah, there would be a reduction.
And how about Clusaware? How much, do you know how many feet of surface of water will be reduced? The water flows will be reduced by the construction of the site's reservoir?
On the long term, I think there could be a reduction of well, about 1%.
1% of what?
With project versus without project.
1% of the flows into
of the overflow.
Of the overflow.
Yeah.
1%. Okay.
Yeah.
And you don't know if that's how many acre feet that is?
I think it's about 60 or so thousand acre feet.
60,000 acre feet. Okay. So that's the molten weir and the Clusaware, or just the Clusaware?
That's just the Clusaware, and I believe the molten weir is the relative change or effect is also below 1% over the long term. But the magnitude would be smaller because molten weir does not spill
Right.
the same volume as Calusa does.
So your estimation, like approximation of how many acre feet differential?
That would be within 10,000 acre feet.
Okay.
May I add, sorry to interrupt, Mr. King,
Yeah.
may I just add to help in your review of this area or these results are of significance, is that there's a high, these results are presented in Appendix 5C or Exhibit AHO 129 in the testimony, or in the, sorry, my blood sugar is still catching up.
Oh, thank you.
In the Exhibit AHO 129.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Would it be fair to say that the recharge to the aquifer in the east side of the Sacramento River will be reduced by a percentage of the 70,000 acre feet that you estimate coming over into Clusaware and the molten weir?
That's not something I have expertise in.
Well, does your model actually incorporate percolation? You probably have to anticipate percolation of grounding of water surface flows into the ground as it makes its way to the Sutter bypass, don't you?
Right, but I don't know offhand what the resulting effects of this would be.
Okay. And then how about the impact on groundwater dependent ecosystems and the Butte Sink? That's not in your model, is it?
I don't recall.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that. The ecosystems in the pink sink, I didn't.
The Butte Sink, the
Oh.
Butte sink. Okay. And then my last question is, I assume the answer is no, but does your model include tribal ecological knowledge?
I don't recall.
Okay. And then are you aware that the Butte, the Sutter Buttes are part of the creation mythology for the Patwin people?
I'm gonna object as to relevance.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, Mr. Whittington. So my other question,
Mr. King, I didn't actually rule on the objection, which I was going to overrule it if you'd like an answer. I think it goes to the assumptions.
Yes, please. I'm just assuming that I get objected to, I'll get sustained. So.
So I believe that's a question for you, Mr. Whittington.
I don't think I had an answer for it. My answer is I don't know.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. So I have a few questions for Dr. Sadat and Mr. Winslow. Mr. Winslow, are you familiar with operations of the Funks Reservoir?
In a cursory nature, yes.
Okay, and do you believe that there are water quality, there's seasonality to the water quality that comes out of the Funks Reservoir?
Yes, that's standard for any water body to have seasonal variations.
Do you know that Funks Creek actually drains into Funks Reservoir?
Yes, I am aware.
And are you aware that Funks Creek actually drains the old Salt Lake, which was, are you aware that the Funks Creek drains the Salt Lake?
Not specifically. I'm aware of a salt concern in the footprint of the reservoir, but not to which creek it drains.
Are you aware that there was a salt mine called the Crystal Salt Mine, which was a commercial salt mine in 1893 at Salt Lake?
Was that a no, Mr. Winslow? I'm sorry.
I was not aware.
Thank you.
Are you aware that Funks Creek drains serpentine rock sediment?
I am not.
Are you aware that serpentine rock sediment contains manganese and chromium?
I am not.
Are you aware of any water quality measurements regarding chromium, TDS, or mercury from Funks Reservoir right now?
No, my analysis was strictly on temperature.
Okay, not water quality.
Correct.
Okay, so Ms. Sadat, same questions. Have you looked at water quality, the water quality that's the observed water quality that's coming from Funks Reservoir?
I have not.
Do you believe that Funk's reservoir water quality would be indicative of this, indicative, at least in part, to the water quality from the proposed sites reservoir?
Well, I mean, I'm not a water quality expert in that regard, so I do run DSM-2 model. I did run DSM-2 model, which is a water quality and hydrodynamic model, but I believe these questions are more relative to the upcoming panels that more talk about water quality.
Well, thank you. So, Ms. Sadat, are you aware that the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation has entered into Warren Act contracts with several groundwater extractors on the Tehama-Clusa Canal?
I'm not aware of that.
Okay. Do you believe that groundwater being extracted and conveyed in the channel to the Tehama-Clusa Canal could both impact water temperature and water quality?
Objection, lack of foundation. Make sure you explain the sheet.
Okay, so I'd like to bring in King 31, please. Ms. Mullins?
Sorry, was that chain 31?
King 31.
King 31, I'm
Okay,
sorry.
I'm sorry.
Exhibit King. I apologize. Okay, so this, Ms. Sadat, do you see that this is a environmental assessment of the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation for 5-year Warren Act contracts for conveyance of groundwater in Tehama-Clusa Canal for contract years 2023 to 2027?
Yes, I can see that.
So that is the foundation for the question. Do you believe that is a foundation for a question regarding water quality and water temperature in the conveyance from the proposed sites reservoir?
Sorry, I don't.
Maybe
No,
it's not a
no.
good question, but I think, so I guess I'll ask another question, see if I get objected to. So can you go to page 11, King 3111? PDF, I think. Yeah. Okay. So, Ms. Sadat, this is a table that shows the maximum amount of extraction to Tehama-Clusa Canal participants to potentially convey water in the Tehama-Clusa Canal. So do you see, Mr. Sadat, that there's a potential maximum of 89,600 acre feet to be conveyed, groundwater conveyed? in Tamakusa Canal?
Objection, lack of foundation. It's not clear she's familiar with this document.
And I'm not sure, let me pause. I don't think the title says OIC at the top. We're talking about conveyance of groundwater. Well, I'll allow it to the extent that we're just asking about the number reflected on this chart that we're looking at here. So overruled. Ms. Sadat, you can answer to the best of
Thank you. One.
So could you just, like you mentioned that that in the TCC canal, right? I don't know where you get that from in this table. So where exactly you're talking about? Like, is there a specific rows you're talking about? Like,
I'm sorry, what? Pacific,
so could you repeat the question again?
so this, the top of the paragraph, the top of the page says 5-year Warren Act contracts for conveyance of groundwater in the Tamakusa Canal. Correct. And so I'm talking about the potential, the potential for use of the Tamakusa Canal for the conveyance of groundwater, which may have different temperature and different water quality. So my question is, do you believe there's potential for 89,600 feet, 600 acre feet of groundwater to be conveyed in the Tamakusa Canal, which may have a different temperature or a different water quality than what is the surface water that's stored in the site's reservoir?
I'm gonna object.
Yeah, Mr. King, that's, yeah, thank you. Yeah, sustained. Mr. King, that is too many things in one question.
Okay.
And I'm not sure, it also, can you reflect for me why this is a question for Ms. Sadat?
It has to do with water quality and water temperature of water that's going to be conveyed from the site's reservoir to the Dunnigan pipeline.
I see, okay. Let's start with this quest. Oh, maybe I can start here.
Thank you.
Based on Ms. Sadat, thank you. Based on the table presented here, do you see this column that says 2023, 2028 proposed contractual maximum in acre feet?
I see that, yes. I just don't understand the term. I'm not familiar with this document. This is the first time I'm seeing this. I don't know assumptions. I don't know what even it means. So I don't know if I can.
Well, I can just ask one more question and we can move on.
Okay.
If a farmer in the Colusa County Water District pumps water and pumps the water from the aquifer and conveys 1,000 acre feet, and that water temperature is different than the surface water, is it impactful to your analysis if that water temperature of the extracted water is different than the surface water from site's reservoir?
I'm sorry, Mr. King, that was too, like, the question was too long. Could you break it down?
Well, is it possible that water temperature extracted from a groundwater well and conveyed in the Tamakusa Canal could be different than water temperature assumed that is assumed in your model from site's reservoir?
So in my temperature analysis, which was the temperature blending model for sites releases, I did not take into account the groundwater.
Okay, fair
I'm not
enough.
sure if this is a question for
No,
me.
that's great. Thank you. And then the other question, did you take in account of differences in groundwater quality in your model for extractions and conveyance of groundwater into Tamakusa Canal?
Objection, asked and answered. She didn't account for groundwater.
Okay, well, thank you. So Ms. Sadat, it's your understanding, Dr. Sadat, that you're understanding that water is going to be stored in the site's reservoir, conveyed in Tamakusa Canal, and then conveyed through the through the pipelines at Dunnigan into Coosa Basin Drain. Is that your
Yes.
understanding?
Yeah.
Are you aware that water is expected to back up from the Dunnigan from the intersection of the Dunnigan pipeline and the Coosa Basin Drain?
I do not have any information about the backhoe.
Are you are you aware that it is supposed to back up from that intersection of the Coosa Basin Drain and the proposed Dunnigan pipeline as far as the Balsam Weir?
I don't have any information about that.
Are you aware that the Balsam Weir is in Coosa County, a little bit north of College City?
I don't know the exact locations right now.
Okay. Does your model anticipate potential temperature differences because water is backing up versus flowing north of that intersection between the Dunnigan pipeline and the Coosa Basin Drain?
Objection assumes facts not in evidence with respect to water backing up.
That's fair. Let me try the question. Ms. Sadat, in your modeling, does your modeling incorporate a possibility that the flow of water would slow or stop in the area? And you might have to help me, Mr. King. The intersection of the Dunnigan Basin Drain and the
Dunnigan pipeline and the Coosa Basin Drain.
And the Coosa Basin Drain.
North of there, yeah.
Thank you.
I don't think that's considered in the model.
Okay. And then does the model anticipate any changes in water quality because of potential change in flow of water in the Coosa Basin Drain?
This analysis, we did not evaluate water quality at this location with this. I mean, the temperature blending tool was only to evaluate the water temperature at this location.
So did the model evaluate the impaired water body status of the Coosa Basin Drain?
I'm not sure. I don't think so.
So the model did not incorporate any of the 303 US EPA 303D impaired water bodies data.
Objection asked and answered.
Okay.
Overruled. Let's make sure we're clear. Ms. Sadat, Dr. Sadat.
I'm not familiar with this. I don't know if these assumptions are implemented at calcium, so it's considered. Otherwise, I don't know.
Okay, so I'll just go. Are you aware that the Coosa Basin Drain is an impaired water body under the US EPA 303D list for mercury and dissolved oxygen?
I'm not aware of that.
Are you aware that Cache Creek is on the 303D US EPA list for mercury, dissolved oxygen, and specific conductance?
I'm not aware. This is not what I've done.
Okay. Are you aware that Freshwater Creek is a tributary to the Coosa Basin Drain?
No.
Then you're not aware that it's on the US EPA list for indicator bacteria?
No, I'm not an expert in water quality.
Are you aware that Powell Slough is a tributary to the Coosa Basin Drain?
No.
And you're not aware that Powell Slough is on the US EPA list for dissolved oxygen? Is that correct?
That's true.
And are you aware that Sand Creek is a tributary to the Coosa Basin Drain?
Mr. King, this seems inefficient. Where are we going?
All right. So then, thank you very much, Dr. Sadat. Really appreciate your time. Thank you, Mr. Whittington and Mr. Minko, everybody except Dr. Davids, Jeff. So thank you. So I'd like to move to Cites 142, and it's the GSP, so it's like 4,000 pages. So I want there's one chart, and it's figure 318. If you can find that.
Do you happen to have a page?
I don't. I blow up my computer when I try to move around that and be honest. I've already blown it up once, so it's figure 318. If you can look at the I don't know what to say.
We'll see if we blow up our state issued
Yeah.
computers. I'll look to my team. One of you may want to open it in the background and see if you can get a page number.
I tried to send this in advance and I failed like 3 times before getting it right. So I apologize, Ms. Mullen and her team, for trying to. So I did try to be a little bit more efficient here. So.
I understand.
I'm currently searching through the 3,993 page PDF as well for figure 318. So I'll let you know if I strike gold here.
Okay. So as you're doing that, Dr. Davids, can I ask you a couple questions? What's the current status of the Coosa Subbasin Groundwater Sustainability Plan?
I was slightly distracted, Mr. King. Sorry, 1 second. I do have the page number for figure 318, and maybe we can return to your question.
Great. Thank you.
So it's a page number 215, PDF page 215. It's a full size map of the SAGB of the Coosa Subbasin.
Great. So sites 142, page 215, we're going to try.
You got it.
Yeah. So if you could just maybe make it a little smaller, or can you make it a little bit smaller? There we go. Keep on smaller. Just keep a little bit smaller. Oh, not that small. All right. So Dr. Davids, do you reckon you prepared this, and so do you recognize this figure?
I do. Yeah, this is a map showing what's called the Soil Agricultural Groundwater Banking Index, or SAGB for short. And it essentially categorizes, based on a number of different things, including geology, the ability for these portions of the subbasin to recharge water. At least it's an estimate based on best available information into these 6 different categories that we can see, on the screen, symbolized as different colors.
Right, and this actually relates to a specific project management action, doesn't it?
Well, I think in general, SAGB is used statewide.
No,
it's a product. It's
location, potential, recharge.
Yeah, maybe I can finish off there. Is that the SAGB is a tool that was developed by researchers at UC Davis, and is generally a tool at kind of a reconnaissance level that folks use to target areas for recharge projects. And then more specific geophysical work should be done with like electromagnetic work to understand site characteristics if a project was actually going to be funded and built. But this is kind of a reconnaissance level understanding of potential locations for recharge.
Okay, so my first question is that this area includes the east side of the Sacramento River, doesn't it?
I'm sorry, it includes the east
side of the Sacramento River.
Yeah, so I mentioned in my direct testimony when I gave my oral summary that the eastern boundary of the Coosa Subbasin generally follows the Sacramento River, but there is a portion that goes off to the east, and you can see that if you zoom in, Ms. Mullen, to sort of the center part of the figure. You can see the Sacramento River. If you see Colusa there, if we can kind of zoom in on that portion of the map. Yeah, perfect. That's great. So what you can see is that, and I think this is what you mean, Mr. King, is that the Sacramento River actually is not the boundary for this small section north of Colusa. And so that does actually show a portion of the east of the Sacramento River in this figure.
Right, and part of the white area there is actually part of the Butte subbasin, isn't that correct?
That's correct. Yep. The next subbasin to the east would be the Butte subbasin.
But that still is part of Colusa County.
There is a Colusa County portion of the Butte subbasin. That's correct.
Correct. Okay. And if assuming that the area of origin and county of origin includes Colusa County, that portion of the Butte subbasin should be considered as far as any benefits or detriments of this project to Colusa County. Is that a correct statement? Do you believe?
Well, let's actually put this in context. Ms. Mullen, if you could zoom back out for me, that'd be great, so we can see the entire Colusa subbasin. So the portion that I think, Mr. King, that you're highlighting is the small white area. If we look at that red polygon up in the northeastern corner of the red polygon, there's a small white area. That's the portion of Colusa County that's actually within the Butte subbasin. And then relative to the entire Colusa subbasin, which is about 723,000 acres, that's a pretty small portion. And I think we would expect the, impacts basically on the Colusa subbasin and then that small portion of the Butte subbasin to be somewhat related and to kind of follow each other. As we know, the lines that delineate a subbasin are somewhat artificial in terms of geopolitical boundaries at times.
Mr. Whittington just testified that he believes like 70,000 acre feet of water can flow from the molten weir and the Colusa weir. Did he say that, Dr. Davids?
I did hear that, yes.
And that would actually benefit to some. Do you have a potential estimate of like how much of that could be groundwater recharge for the east side of Sacramento River in Colusa County?
And just to be specific here, Mr. King, are we talking about the Colusa weir and the molten weir, or which weirs are we talking about? I know the 70,000 was for the molten, is that correct? Or which?
No,
I just want to be precise here.
The amount is 10,000. I understood the amount to be about 10,000 for the molten and 60,000 for the Colusa weir.
For Colusa, okay. Yeah, so let's think through the physics here. When those weirs would be flowing, those would be at flood stages. And so you'd expect the soils to be generally saturated and kind of like at their maximum capacity, which is why there's so much runoff in the Sacramento River anyways to start with. So I think the absence or the presence of that water spreading out into those into those floodways, I think generally there would be some amount of recharge. I think that's a fair thing to say. Would it be significant? It's hard to say. I think generally though, because it's during a very wet condition, the recharge sort of capability of the soil, if you will, would generally be low. But I think there would be some amount of recharge.
Okay. And how about the benefit to groundwater dependent ecosystems in the Butte Sink? Would there be a benefit to those groundwater dependent ecosystems?
Well, I mean, certainly, if there's water, flowing through those weirs and some of it's coming to recharge, there could be some incremental benefit to groundwater dependent ecosystems. I suppose maybe a more interesting question would be, would the impact realize if it went from 60,000 CFS to 55,000 CFS, for example? So in other words, I don't think anybody's contemplating those weirs completely drying up with the operation of sites. I think we're contemplating some sort of reduction in those flows. So let's say from 60 to maybe, the capacity of the project is, I think, 3,900 CFS. So if we went from 60,000 to, 56,100, for example, in my expert opinion, would I say that there's a significant impact to groundwater dependent ecosystems or groundwater recharge because of that change? I would say no.
Okay, but you didn't calculate that you didn't do that calculation in your report, did you? In your testimony?
No, I did not.
Okay, so, all right. And we're, so in the, question regarding the status of the Colusa, the groundwater sustainability plan for the Clusa subbasin, what is the current status?
Yeah, so it's in, let's see, let's rewind the clock here a little bit. So in October of 2023, we received, and by we I mean the Glen Groundwater Authority and the Clusa Groundwater Authority received a letter from DWR stating that the groundwater sustainability plan that was initially submitted in, I believe it was April of 22, was incomplete. And they identified 3 deficiencies, and we can go into those in greater detail if necessary. We worked with the GSAs to revise the GSP, and that was submitted. And Mr. King, I know you were a very active participant. We appreciate you for that. And we submitted that in April. And as far as we know, we haven't heard back from Department of Water Resources yet. So it's in this incomplete status, hopefully to be approved by the end of the year.
What were the 3 areas, 3 deficiencies identified in the October letter from the DWR?
Yeah, so the first one had to do with basically the assessment of overdraft for the subbasin. I believe we have the PDF open that we're looking at right now. Why don't we go to page 6 on this PDF? I think this is an easier one to find. And we can actually scroll through the, thank you, Ms. Mullen. So essentially, let's go, I got the,
Page
actually,
2.
can we go up to
Page 2.
page, yeah, it's PDF page 4. So just a
Okay.
couple pages up from there. That'd be great. There's some blue text above a table. If we could just
Right
zoom in
there,
on
right
that.
there. Yeah, that's what I'm looking at.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So yeah, and I could have done it from memory, but I think it's easier for people to be able to see this. So the first assessment again, or the first piece of
Ms. Mullen, can you blow it up one more time for me? My poor glasses. Thank you. Great.
There we go.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the first determination was that the assessment of overdraft needed to be redone essentially for the subbasin. The second one was that the sustainable management criteria for groundwater levels were not compliant or protective enough with GSP regulations. And then finally, the third one was that the sustainable management criteria, that's the SMCs, were not protective or compliant with GSP regulations for subsidence. So those were the 3 deficiencies identified.
Right. And what was your estimated amount of overdraft for the Clusa subbasin?
So I think that's
62,000 acre feet annually.
Yeah, and I think we could go down to page 6 on this one. If you, it's the 3rd bullet point on page 6, Ms. Mullen, and it's 62,000 acre feet is correct.
Okay. And can you discuss?
Oops,
yeah.
I'm sorry. One second. I think we just scrolled right by it. So I think back up on page 6 here, and you can see right at the very top of the screen, 62,000 acre feet per year.
Right, right. And then how about the subsidence and the need to establish the critical infrastructure working group? Do you understand my question, Mr. The Clusa Subbasin Critical Infrastructure Working Group? Why was that established?
Well, that was established in response to the 3rd deficiency identified related to the sustainable management criteria for subsidence.
Okay. And what were the was the Davis Weir bladder dam designated as critical infrastructure by Glen Clusa Irrigation District?
That's a great question, and I wish I had this entire 3,900 page document memorized, but unfortunately that point I do not know. We had actually a different team member, West Yost took the lead on that portion of this revision. So I think they would probably know off the top of my head. I don't, unfortunately.
Would you think that I'm
sorry,
way off?
Just for the record, Mr. Davids, can you say that? Did you say a specific person's name? You just said it so quickly.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So we had a teaming partner. It was named West Yost. So it's the WEST and then YOST is the name of the firm that did that portion of this investigation or the revision, basically. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that.
I apologize, Mr. King.
No, thank you. Would you believe that I'm probably wrong if I believe I saw that in the GSP?
Oh,
Okay,
no, if you're saying that you saw it in there, then it's probably in there. I mean, it'd be helpful to be able to look at together, but yeah, I think
yeah,
if
thank you.
if you saw it in there, I would trust you on that.
How about was I-5 considered critical infrastructure?
Yes, I do recall conversations about that for sure.
And were sections of the Tehama-Clusa Canal considered, is the Tehama-Clusa Canal structure itself considered critical infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that significant portions of surface water are brought into the subbasin by the Tehama-Clusa Canal, I think we all consider that to be critical infrastructure.
Do you remember that certain portions of it around Arbuckle have already been identified as having issues, but not necessarily from subsidence at this point? Is that your recollection?
Yeah. So this is a little bit of a complicated question. The subsidence maps provided by DWR from INSAR, INSAR, it's an acronym, um, basically show some subsidence in the Arbuckle area of the Tehama-Clusa Canal. And there was also a reported issue with the siphon. I think this is what you're referring to. That they weren't sure if it was just a maintenance issue. I mean, the Tehama-Clusa Canal is on the order of, somewhere between 40 to 60 years old, depending on which reach you're looking at. And so there wasn't any conclusive evidence as to whether it was a maintenance, just kind of an age issue, or actually something related to subsidence.
Great, thank you. And finally, regarding there was a memorandum of understanding regarding domestic well mitigation. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
And the October letter from the DWR actually referenced some DWR guide considerations for identifying and addressing drinking water well impacts. Does that coincide with your recollection?
That's correct.
Are there drinking wells or domestic wells in the College City area that have been having issues for providing drinking water to the residents of College City, to your recollection?
Let's see, the two areas that have had the most significant issues with domestic well impacts, and this is summarized, in the groundwater sustainability plan and the revised GSP, are the Orland, Artois area in the north, and then the Arbuckle, College City areas in the south.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you. And then can you explain how the human right to water is incorporated in your analysis for the groundwater sustainability plan and sustainability and the sustainability in generally for subbasins in California?
This is a difficult question. Okay. I'm going to, take my best shot at trying to understand what your question is. I think depending on how far I get into it, I might ask for you to break it down or to clarify things. So
Well,
the human
Dr.
right.
Davis, I'm actually objecting to calling for a legal conclusion.
Okay. So do you know if the human right to water is part of the DWR handbook?
I'm sorry, Mr. King, which DWR handbook?
I'm not sure actually. So
I mean, relative to Sigma, to the Sustainable Management Act?
I believe their general handbook, but I don't know. But is the human right to water an important part of sustainability for the Clusa Subbasin? Mr. Davids, Dr. Davids?
So absolutely. I mean, I think in my opening remarks, I think I did mention that the Clusa Subbasin is in a state of overdraft and that there's several things that are undesirable about the current conditions. And so I think in the GSP, I think outlines that the human right to water, I think, is a very important part of DWR and the state board's basically objectives for what groundwater sustainability means. And I think by extension from that, I think that it should be an important part of any groundwater sustainability agency's development of a groundwater sustainability plan, which is supported by the MOU, which you referenced, the Memorandum of Understanding for domestic well mitigation that the GSAs have committed to. And I think we think that's a very important thing, to not leave people without water. So I think absolutely that's an important thing.
Do you believe the State Water Resources Control Board against for anti-racism is part of the consideration for sustainability, for groundwater sustainability plan? Maybe it's if well, let me ask a better question, I guess. Do you know that College City area has a large Mexican American population who maybe do you know that?
I'm going to object as to outside the scope of Dr. David's testimony. I've been pretty lenient here, and I'm sure Dr. Davis can answer tons of questions about the GSP, but the primary focus of his testimony was on potential impacts and chases and recharge. So
that's true, Mr. Ferguson, but on cross-exam, Mr. King gets to ask questions outside the scope of his written testimony. So
yeah, the GSP is not on trial here. So
let's have a connection from Mr. King. Mr. King, these are interesting questions about the GSP, but can you please connect it to our considerations related to the proposed sites project?
Yes, the overdraft that's been cited has a disproportionate impact on people of color, communities of color. That's a statement. So I'll ask that question. Do you believe that?
Well, wait, Mr. King, we haven't made the connection to sites.
Oh, after sites, in that if water does not flow to the area near College City, will it have a disproportionate? If water is held back behind Davis Weir Dam and does not flow to near College City, will it have a disproportionate impact on communities of color, which
well, so let me slow you down again, because I want to follow.
Yeah.
And this part of this is my education, so I apologize for the why Davis Weir? What is the connection between the operation of Davis Weir Dam and the proposed project?
Because Davis Weir Dam is currently operated where there's large periods of time where limited or no flow comes south of Davis Weir Dam. Davis Weir Dam is north of Balsam Dam and north of College City. And water flowing down the Callista Basin drain actually provides recharge and maintains groundwater levels for domestic wells within the SMSA of College City.
So, well, okay, you can try that. Mr. Davids, did you understand the geography here? Are you able to answer this question based on what Mr. King, well, he hasn't gotten to the question yet, but do you understand the geography? I'm not sure. I could probably go look at a map and understand it better, but.
I have a general sense of the geography out in this part of the woods. Yeah. So I can.
Okay. And so Mr. King, when you say that water will be backed up behind the Davis Weir, what do you mean?
The operation, the Glen Close Irrigation District operation is to keep the water levels sufficiently so that they can service the lower reaches of Glen Close Irrigation District.
So why is that related to this? And I'm not trying to be,
okay.
I'm honestly asking the question, how is that related to the site's operations?
Because GCID is part of the potential service area and also potential conveyance, even the upper reaches of the GCID is all interrelated, interconnected with the operation of Davis Weir. In that it's to be included. It's in testimony by Mr. Brown. It's likely to be included, or it's part of the zone, potentially addition to Zone 3, which would be a service area. But even currently, it's all interrelated.
Let me try to summarize. So it's because based on it's your assertion that water will be delivered from Sites Reservoir to GCID as a storage partner. And as a result, that water will be used or will be not allowed to flow through the Davis Weir. Is that where
it will impact flows in Davis Weir, yes.
Okay. Thank you for that.
And that could be challenged, yes, but that's yeah.
Okay. And now I think you had a question for Mr. Davids before
So if flows are restricted from the Davis Weir, will if groundwater aquifer recharge supporting groundwater levels for the domestic wells in College City, will that have a disproportionate impact on people of color?
Objection lacks foundation. There's no indication that the authority is going to operate this Davis Weir. In fact, they don't have control over the Davis Weir, such that they could change the operation.
Okay. Well, Ms. Kunz,
let's try this again. I think he phrased it as a hypothetical, so let's get to that. If flows are reduced, if that's an if, would that have I'll start with this. Would that have an potential impact to groundwater recharge in the what is your area of interest? The College City area, Mr. King?
It's the area south of, specifically the area south of Davis Weir and north of Balsam Dam.
Did you understand that question, Mr. Davids? I know it was
It's fairly scattered at this point. Could we pull up sites 261, which is the summary of my presentation? There's actually a map figure. Perhaps we could go to the last page of that. Thank you, Ms. Mullen. And I think I do want to point out that I think most of Mr. King, most of your questions have been focused on kind of building the scene for the Coosa Basin, for the Coosa Subbasin having a groundwater sustainability issue. And I think the groundwater sustainability plan that we revised, I think, is congruent with your understanding. So there's no argument there. I think what I tried to do in my analysis was essentially identify the ways that the site's reservoir might move the needle for groundwater sustainability plan, either in the positive direction in terms of increased recharge, those would be indicated by the green arrows here on the map, or in the negative direction, those would be indicated by the orange arrows on the map. And so I've quantitatively kind of stated the range of those impacts on this slide here, from negative 2,400 acre feet potentially in the decrease of recharge, all the way up to a potential increase in recharge of 25,000 acre feet. So to link what you said about GCID, I just want to make sure that we connect those dots back to my testimony here. So impact number 3 is a range of potential impacts from 0 to 21,000 acre feet, positive or increase in recharge. So what you just mentioned about GCID actually receiving sites water could actually be used for that extra water from sites that GCID is receiving. That means that they're either not pumping groundwater, so that's in lieu recharge, or they're using that water for the purposes of direct recharge within the subbasin. That's just a net benefit to the subbasin in terms of that extra water from sites being used within the subbasin. So the College City area, to get back to your question, is a little bit off this map. It's to the south of where this map basically cuts off. And I don't think I understand the demographics enough to know whether there's a disproportional. I think your question was specifically, are people of color going to be disproportionately impacted by a reduction, which I guess maybe I'm actually going to stop asking the question, because I don't even think I understand sort of the framing of the question. Yeah.
And Mr. King, let me give you a time check. I'm told you're at 10 minutes. I'll give you, some of these questions were mine, so I slowed us down a bit. I'll give you an addition of 5, but I did want to let you know you're looking at a little less than 15.
I would ask Mr. Ornbaum if he would give me time, give me 30 minutes.
Well, why don't you ask him offline so you two can confer?
Okay, well, we can do that. So, all right. So, so let's move to then sites 143. Ms. Mullen. Mr. Davids, do you recognize this document? Dr. Davids?
Yes, sir. I believe this is the slightly less draconianly sized.
Yes.
This is what's called an annual report. Maybe you could scroll down this one for me just so I can confirm, but I do recognize the cover. Maybe scroll down a little bit more so we can see the text here. Yeah, so basically, the groundwater sustainability agencies for a subbasin are required to produce a groundwater sustainability plan at the initiation of their management of the subbasin. And then every year they're supposed to provide an annual report, which is kind of like a report card, how are we doing type thing. This represents the report card for the water year 2023. So this is the most recent report card, if you will, for the Calusa subbasin.
Thank you. Ms. Moles, can you go to page 43, not PDF 43, but it's page 43. It's figure 6.2. Maybe it's a little bit farther. It's yeah, so six more actual pages then. Must be 49. There you go. Dr. David, so this is in your report, and it shows the net vertical displacement from subsidence from June 2015 to October 2023. Is that correct?
Let's see. Could we scroll in? I just want for the record to be clear on the time period. I believe it's 2016, and I think you mentioned 15, but could we zoom in on the legend there, Ms. Mullen, on the lower left of the figure? Thank you for your support here. Maybe a little bit more. I think my eyes are also waning. Okay, it has become a 5 on my side. It looks very 6-ish, but yes, 2015 of October 2015 through October 2023.
Right. And so where's the worst subsidence in the Arbuckle area? Is what's the highest level per year for those 8 years? No, that's actually not per year. That's the cumulative amount. Yeah. So what is the cumulative amount for those 8 years?
Let's see. So inferring from the color chart on the left, it appears that we are likely in the sort of 1.5 to 2 foot range, maybe upwards of 2.4 for certain areas right around Arbuckle, a little bit to the south west appears to be the darkest red color there.
Isn't that the area of the Tehama-Calusa Canal?
The Tehama-Calusa Canal crosses over the southern portion of that red spot there. Yeah, you can see it labeled. I don't know why it's discontinuous, but it continues farther to the north, to the west of Maxwell and Williams and so forth.
Do you believe that is there a possibility that this overdraft will continue if there is more groundwater overdraft?
Objection.
I think, Mr. King, the question is unclear. Will you try the question again?
Is there an expectation that subsidence will increase in the future due to continued groundwater overdraft in this area?
Objection assumes facts not in evidence with respect to continued overdraft in this area.
So yeah, Mr. King, is your question that there's an expectation of continued overdraft? Or is your question that if there is overdraft, the subsidence would continue?
If there is overdraft, will the subsidence continue? Actually, both are valid questions because that's why we have management actions in the plan. But if there is continued overdraft, will subsidence continue?
So this is a hypothetical question. The hypothetical being, if there's continued overdraft, will subsidence continue? Is that correct? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Okay. Subsidence is a complex process. It has to do with both the dewatering of basically the lowering of pore pressure at depth, oftentimes within an aquifer, and it also has to do with the geologic media or material that pore pressure is being reduced within. So, I think it's difficult to say with specificity that yes, subsidence would absolutely continue if overdraft continued. Oftentimes there's some threshold processes, but I think in general, one might say that subsidence goes hand in hand with overdraft. Well, specifically, let me say subsidence generally goes hand in hand with a lowering of groundwater levels because that's what's depressurizing the pore space at depth. So I think generally, I think generally that's true.
And is the subsidence in the Freant Dam, was that the lack of operational capacity of the Freant Dam, was that caused by subsidence?
Objection calls for speculation.
Not the Freant Dam, but the Freant Canal.
Objection calls for speculation.
Mr. Davids, do you have any knowledge with respect to the Freant Dam and
the Freant Canal? I'm sorry, Freant Canal.
I'm sorry, yes, Freant Canal.
So are we talking about the Friant? I know it's a small vowel pronunciation, but the Friant. Okay, and we're talking about all the way down now in the San Joaquin subbase or valley, kind of between the Kern and I guess the Fresno River. Is that the area that we're talking about?
Correct. Yeah.
And could you restate your question, please?
Let me try I'm going to try this question. Mr. Davids, based on your expertise, can subsidence result in decreased capacity to conveyance structures such as a canal or an aqueduct?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And is it foreseeable that the conveyance capacity from the site's reservoir could be diminished by future subsidence in the Tamaulipas Canal south of Arbuckle?
Well, I'm wrestling a little bit with the hypothetical here because I think the nature of my testimony was trying to articulate the potential range of impacts on the Calusa subbasin, and it seems informative to talk about what we think actually is going to happen to the subbasin instead of jumping to the hypothetical that there's going to be persistent overdraft. I mean, I think my conclusion is that on average, or basically looking at the range, there's probably a better chance that the site's reservoir is actually going to be a benefit to the Calusa subbasin. And as somebody who has helped work on sustainability in the subbasin, I'm excited about the idea of having additional surface water for use so that we can relax pumping so that we don't have the impacts on the canal that you're talking about. So I'm a little bit concerned about the hypotheticals that are assuming that there's going to be a negative impact from sites. I think we should be maybe talking about, will sites have a negative impact or not necessarily if there's a negative impact, what's going to happen to the infrastructure and that sort of thing. Hopefully that's illustrative or helpful.
But the current overdraft is 62,000 acre feet. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I'm sure hoping that sites can make a dent in that 62,000 so that we can slow down subsidence and domestic well drawing and all those things.
And your estimate of in lieu potential recharge is 20,000 acre feet.
Well, I think the range, again, if we go back to that slide that we were just looking at on 261, I believe it was, I think the range, if I recall, was negative 2,500 up to as high as 25,000. Thank you, Ms. Mullen. So yes, so sites, even in the best case scenario, in my professional opinion, sites doesn't solve the Calusa subbasin's groundwater sustainability issues, but it could make a significant dent if that water that's impounded in sites, both from Funk's Creek and Stone Corral Creek, and from the imported Sacramento River water that's basically dedicated to storage partners in the Sacramento Valley. If a good portion of that water is used within the subbasin, either as direct recharge or in lieu of groundwater pumping, so in lieu recharge, it could make a significant positive impact on Calusa subbasin sustainability. Almost about 40%, right, could potentially be dealt with if all that water is actually used locally.
Oh, does that require the storage partners to use that water for irrigation purposes rather than selling that water?
Well, this is an important question, and I think there's a very specific reason why I chose to present these impacts that are highly dependent on future operational and management decisions as a range. And so you can see impact 3, it does have a range from 0 to 21,000 acre feet. Now the 0 would represent basically that all the water that was impounded from Funk's Creek and from Stone Corral Creek, and all the water brought in from the Sacramento River via the Tehama-Coosa Canal and the Glen-Coosa Irrigation District Canal. So all of that water and precipitation into the reservoir, if all of that water was actually then sold south, that would not have a positive impact on the Coosa Subbasin.
Thank you for that. So can't we then go to page of sites 143? Can we move to page 48?
And maybe if I could, I'm sorry.
Hold on, Mr. King, I have 1 minute on the clock left for you. So
okay,
you know,
so
do
you want to maybe have a break and then I can talk to Mr. Ornbaum and see if he's.
I think that would be appropriate. So we will pause here. My plan would be to return at 1:30, but before we do, are there any other procedural issues from the larger group that we need to address before we break for lunch? All right, seeing none, we will break. We'll reconvene at 1:30. Do plan to have to log back into the Zoom, and we'll pick up again with you, Mr. King, and any discussions you may have had over the lunch. And thank you to the panel. I know
Just want to say how handsome Mr. Ornbaum looks right now on Zoom. All right, thank you.
I'm supposed to log off?
No, you have to do anything.